Hello, and thank you for joining us here on the Anarchist Experience. My name is Robert Kruger. I'm your host. Today we have a great debate. We're going to be doing a 3-hour-long debate, and we're going to have two different sides, one arguing the labor theory of value and the other side arguing the subjective theory of value. And we're going to determine, in our own minds at least, which one we find to be more accurate and applicable to what it is that we see in real life. In any case, I just wanted to let everybody know that if you have a debate that you would like to see, done on the Anarchist Experience and have me moderate the debate, I think that I do a fair and open option for having people being able to speak their mind and have a discussion. So, without much further ado, I'd like to go ahead and have everybody go ahead and introduce themselves and then where their material can be found at the start, and then we will go ahead and get started. If you'd like to see the format of the debate, please go onto the event on Facebook and check out what the format is. In any case, let's start with Victor, if you would.
Yes, my name is Victor Pross. I am siding with the anarcho-capitalist side. I go by the moniker, or have been dubbed by the moniker of anarchist artist, because being a painter and an artist is my chosen vocation, and I'm also a public speaker as well. And Pross, P-R-O-S-S, if you want to send me a friend request or watch some of my videos on YouTube, that'll pretty much give you the fuller picture.
All right, and Jake Tompkins.
Yeah, hi, I'm Jake. I run a YouTube channel called Red and Black Revolutionary. I'm just an anarchist, communist, and I basically just make videos about politics. That's mostly it. I don't really do anything else. I run a couple Facebook groups and pages for that kind of stuff. But you can generally find me in my links at Red and Black Revolutionary on YouTube. No spaces, no capitals, just Red and Black Revolutionary.
And Michael?
No capitalists.
Hey everyone.
Hello.
Bear with me as I go over some of my achievements. I actually have somewhere I'm going with this. As you guys know, many of you at least know, I was a pilot since age 9, VP of Smarketing over at an internet security firm as of now. I have 3 degrees with a master's, millions and millions of video views online. I was elected into a political party position until I realized how futile that was. I have created the Voluntary Virtues Network, which we are so happy to be on here today, and I have a Facebook page with around 200,000 subscribers and some great contributors there. I'm flown around to give speeches. I hope you guys can come see me in Acapulco in February, and Jackalope in August in Arizona. I was given a full ride scholarship, multiple Dean's List awards, ranked the #1 Radio Shack manager in the world twice. I donate to charities. I love the beach and exercise and personal responsibility, and most importantly, Robert, and to everybody else here who's listening, at least tonight, I am not saying you have to value any of that.
Okay. And our additional guest from the ANCOM side.
Howdy.
All right. Well, there we go. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and save the rest of my time for additional comments that I might have later on during the show. We're going to go ahead and start with 10 minutes for each side to go ahead and present their particular case, but we do need to kind of do a, coin flip to determine which side gets to go first. So what we're going to do is I'm going to take this coin, I'm going to flip it, and I don't know, how about heads for ANCOM?
Yeah.
Yeah, the heads, the intellect.
ANCOMs go first.
Oh, okay. Interesting. All right. So I'll just start out then?
Yes.
Okay.
Good.
Well, I'm coming from a standpoint, obviously, of the labor theory of value given the debate, and I come from the particular, the labor theory of value is not, one homogenous thing. It's a broad umbrella for a couple different kinds of theories. Mainly at least the theories that I know about are the Marxian and the neoclassical labor theory of value. Well, not neoclassical, classical. And I'm coming from a Marxian standpoint. So well, not totally, but I'm mostly into the Marxian labor theory of value. And so, like, my basic argument is that economic value is not what the subjectivists claim it to be. I see economic value as something completely separate from personal preferences. And rather, instead of that, it's a certain type of object that we use in our specific state of political economy that we refer to as capitalism. And that object being the object that is created and has what's called exchange value. So it has usefulness in market exchange. And the only way we can create this kind of product, this commodity, as it's called, the only way we can do that is to labor directly. Not, it's not labor in any particular form. It's labor in the abstract form. So any type of labor that can, any type of physical labor can produce this. But it needs to be labor, and it is directly measured in the labor that you do to produce it. And so that's my basic argument, because you cannot have the commodity without the labor to produce such. And the how much of a commodity, how something measures in being a commodity, in being a value, is dependent upon the labor that one puts into it. And that's my basic argument. As to where the subjective theory fails, number one, it was born out of a critique of Marx's theory, and it was going off of the kind of idea that what Marx was, talking about in the terms of value was personal preferences. And Marx was talking about something like I am talking about, completely different from that. He was talking about the commodity that I was just stating. So that's kind of where that's one part of where I think the subjective theory of value fails. It completely misunderstands Marx's approach to value. And also, like most forms of bourgeois theory, it completely abstracts from the real world conditions. And so in this case, it abstracts from the form of value, the exchange value, the commodity, and reduces economic value to personal preferences that one might have for certain things. And that's my main problem with the subjectivist theory of value. So, yeah, I mean, that's my piece, I guess.
Should I say something now?
Yes, please.
All right. I'm going under the moniker of Douglas Galt. I've been an anarchist for a few years, and this is my half-assed attempt at getting into public speaking. Now, I'm arguing for the labor theory of value in that labor is sort of a lot of the reasons why capitalism works, and sort of the basis for communism as well. Like, if you have several people working in an assembly line, then each of their jobs takes labor, and at the end, all of their labor is added up into the value of a car or machine or what have you. And labor can also be measured in things like banknotes, which we sort of have a problem with here in America. Obviously, many anarchists know about this, and I feel like the labor theory of value is a good measurement for how money works and things like that. Yeah, I would like to save time for me and Jake, because he's much better at arguing for these things than I am.
All right, now we're going to go to the ANCAP side, or pro-subjective theory of value.
Who's to speak first? You want to go first, Mike? I don't care. It doesn't matter to me.
Well, I definitely have a lot to say. So, yeah, let me go ahead and go first, guys. Let me do that. All right, everyone muted up. Here we go. First of all, I do want to thank everyone for coming out here tonight. What I want to try to prove today is not only that the labor theory of value is incorrect in its premise, but that it's actually a tool created by those with political agendas to further their hate of individual choice and freedom, as a means of political upheaval, but not really grounded in science, in fact. How I view it, and many other people view it, as an excuse for many people who we would concern as lazy and who dump their responsibilities on others, how it tries to squash individuality, how it encourages all actions as being equal, as if 1 hour of rape is equitable to 1 hour of feeding the homeless. The labor theory of value was used by economists such as Adam Smith, so it's not just extremist leftists who got caught up in the LTV hype. And what we're really talking about today is economic value theories. If we could really have a shortened title, a summary title for what we're debating, it's economic value theory. So let's define our terms real quick. The labor theory of value is also known as the cost theory of value, and states that the value of goods and services are determined by the amount of labor required to produce said goods and services. The subjective theory of value, the idea that an object's value is not inherent and is instead worth more or less to different people based on how much they desire or need the object. Now, economies are created via consumer choices done along with investment capital, which we'll go into momentarily. But by and large, we are all somewhat different and have different preferences. Not all consumers desire or need the same object, and hence value different things at different times. But first I want to ask you, what is the point of economic value theories in the first place? What is the end goal of economic values? Their main purpose is to explain market values. That is, to explain pricing in an economy. Why are toasters less expensive than, say, a slab of gold, etc., right? Well, the first thing is first, the labor theory of value, or to be more exact, the cost theory of value, and I want to make sure I do include raw materials costs are pointed out in this. They don't explain the variables of market prices, let alone cost. It simply explains relationships among market prices. So follow me for a second. We're going to look at a labor theory of value equation. So we have a lube shop, an oil change shop, where people get their oil changed. The labor takes 15 minutes to do an oil change, and the cost of the oil and oil filter also apply. The oil and filter cost around $20 in this example. If the labor hour is $40 an hour, and it takes 15 minutes to do the oil change, that's $10 in labor. So we got $10 in labor and $20 for the oil and filter. That brings the total cost and hence price to $30 under the labor theory of value. And without any other factors involved, this is somewhat true. The problem, though, is that the real world has other factors involved. In one hand, the theory acknowledges this by stating that they understand that the costs tied to the items, such as the $20 for the oil and filter, and the $40 hour labor rate, arise from other variables. But on the other hand, they argue that the long-run market prices that are above or below the cost theory prices are abnormal and should not be dependent on other variables. The very position contradicts itself by acknowledging that variables in the beginning, but arguing that outside variables shouldn't have an effect after the creation or in the long term. Why is the beginning more special than the final good? I don't know. That's called cognitive dissonance. But because of this, we can safely say that although the labor theory of value might be somewhat accurate on long-term pricing, where the trend will try to return to labor cost despite outside variables, it can't explain why the spot price is as is for any one day, let alone day-to-day. They don't explain the relationship. They just push it back one relationship step. So they're just pushing the question back one step. How did you come to the pricing on the oil and filter? It's because it was $10 of labor hours and $10 worth of raw materials. Well, where did that come from? We push it back another step, right? Then they just point out the next step in the line. So the subjective theory of value is built into the labor theory of value. They just won't admit it. Now, the labor theory of value's main flaw is that it views economic value as objective, ignoring consumers' individual preferences and needs. You can use really expensive materials when making a house, but if the materials actually harm the resale value of the house, say you use, for some reason, you use diamonds on the roof, but the water does erode diamonds over time, and let's say it erodes all the diamonds away, the homeowner is going to lose money no matter how much labor and time they put into this thing, right? They can't turn around and sell the house for whatever they put into it. That's not how it works. So the subjective theory of value takes the opposite approach by first looking at the real prices in the present, in the past, and in the future, off demand and supply, and they work their way backwards through the labor and raw materials. So Dr. Robert Murphy nailed it in his article, Problems with the Cost Theory of Value. He quotes, "If a farmer discovers a meteorite chock full of gold on his property, he will charge whatever the market will bear for it. He won't sell it for less than the gold producers on account of his virtually zero cost of production," right? And what about rain? Does the farmer not value rain just because it required no labor? Of course he values the free rain. It will bring much more value even though it required no labor. So there's no labor, no cost of labor associated with this, no time, but it still is valuable. And this once again brings up the question, is an hour of rape truly equitable to an hour of feeding the homeless, right? It's an hour, under the labor theory of value, technically it's worth the same. So the labor theory of value is a direct slap in the face to anyone who has never been raped, let alone been victimized in general, right? Maybe I shouldn't just look at rape, but just victimized in general. I think I should re-say that, rephrase that. So at least the subjective theory of value is honest and says that we don't know how to value this, so let's just see how individuals value it as of right now, at this time and date, and that could change in the future, right? And we'll just go from there. The labor theory of value is an authoritative king of tyrants who comes in and tries to force its way on everyone else, because that's the only way value can be given a strict monopolized quantity, right? It's through force and controls and mandates and restrictions, and all of this collectivism, as we know, leads to gun pointings and all this other peaceful people over simple disagreements. I mean, the collective says drugs are bad, right? It's a labor theory of value kind of objective statement. War on drugs is the result, right? If people realize there's no inherent truth to these collective lies, they would be seen silly and unenforceable. We wouldn't have the war on drugs. We wouldn't have the wars for bombing for peace, etc. So the labor theory of value is an attack, a direct attack on individual property rights. The labor theory of value is an attack because they say you can't homestead land without having a value of the labor needed to homestead.
Hey, Mike, just so that you know, Victor also needs some of the time.
All right, well, I'm going to save mine for a little bit later. I have so much to go over.
Okay.
If you guys on the other side want to be...
Victor's turn now.
Later on, go ahead, Victor. I'll finish up later.
All right, yeah. Now, just to draw on some other points, there's this smarmy meme on Facebook. How many capitalists does it take to change a light bulb? None. It takes workers. Now, to live, a human being must think and act and create the values his life requires. That's the direct relevance of free markets. Life is thought and action. It's not just labor, it's thought and action. But for the ANCOM, or insofar as they accept the Marxist labor theory of value, life-sustaining production is ultimately reduced to physical labor. The argument is that the Karl Marx's surplus value theory says that the core of capitalism is exploitation. So in a nutshell, the value of the product produced by labor is greater than the actual price of labor as paid out in wages. So by this standard, the capitalist therefore robs the worker of his real due, as the argument goes, as he only pays half of the whole of production, or the contribution. So the argument purports the surplus value is confiscated by the bourgeois, the owner of the company, and because of this exploitation, the bourgeois capitalists are thieves. And by the way, just a quick little side note here, there's no such thing as a surplus value. All wealth is produced by somebody and belongs to somebody. There's no floating surplus. So I consider it a particular moral outrage to regard wealth as an anonymous tribal product and to talk about redistributing it, which is core to communism, of course. The idea that wealth is the result of some undifferentiated collective process, that we all did something and it's impossible to tell who did what, like you can't tell one ant from another in a colony. Therefore, some sort of egalitarian distribution is necessary. That might have been appropriate to a primordial jungle with a savage horde moving boulders by crude physical labor. But to hold that view in an industrial society where individual achievements are a matter of public record, that's just it's sheer intellectual insanity. So I think that when the communists look at humanity, they don't see individual human beings coming together for cooperation and trade. Instead, what they see is two huge warring classes, the capitalists, the bourgeois, and the workers, the proletariat, in which to any specific human being can be easily categorized. That might not be the exact language that the communists use, but they certainly embrace the premise, just as hardline Marxists accept it as well. So, and since Karl Marx was a self-appointed defender of the workers, the proletariat, of course, if he's going to champion the workers, how do you do that? He found it necessary to deny the contributions made by factory owners, industrialists, and entrepreneurs, the so-called bourgeois. So, and how did Marx arrive at this labor theory of value? He adopted it from, as Mike indicated, from Adam Smith, maybe some other thinkers as well. But he took it and adapted it as well. He redefined it as exploitation theory, thus giving it new life.
All right, that's going to be time.
Okay.
And now we're going to go ahead and go to your questions, and we're going to start with the labor theory of value side is going to ask a question of from the subjective theory of value. So go ahead and ask a question if you would, Jake.
Okay, so I guess I'm going to ask, how do you define value? Because that is central to this conversation, I guess.
You want me to go ahead and take that, Victor?
Yeah. Go ahead. Like, maybe if you want
for this one. So
direct the specific question.
Right? Value itself is a state of mind, right? There is no objective valuation. It's kind of like saying, well, how hungry are you? Can you quantify how hungry you are? Well, I am 72 utils hungry. I mean, you can't quantify how hungry you are. You know, you have a feeling in you. It's in there, but it's all in your head, really, mostly, right? There's something that's sending a signal to your head, and it's in your head. It's in your subconscious. So it's a state of mind. It's not a tangible. It's not a rock or a car that's outside and you can touch it and feel it and paint it. Right? It's an intangible state of mind. So value itself is just completely independent of anything else. It's almost like a nihilist position on value, if you think of it that way. There is no moralistic benchmark or feedback mechanism that comes out here and says this is exactly what value is. It's just whatever people think it is. It's a state of mind. Go ahead, Victor.
Well, to answer the same question?
Wait, can I add something?
Yeah.
I actually am a nihilist, and I think that was actually a pretty interesting take on that.
Right.
Even though it's not necessarily what I think.
And Victor?
Sure. Yeah. Well, yeah. They're coming from maybe a slightly different slant than how Michael answered the question. Of course, I do believe that there are subjective values, and it's quite appropriate. You can't say that one's preference for ice cream or chocolate ice cream is inherently more objective or better than one's preference for vanilla ice cream. But I do also, at the same time, make a defense for an objective theory of values in the sense that you can't call rat poison nutrition because you want it to. There's just an objective. There are objective facts as to values, given the purposes that we set to values. And in this sense, that I retain some of my old Ayn Rand objectivist philosophical leanings, in that, very simply put, in a neutral definition, we can say that values is a code of values to guide a person's choices and actions. The choices and actions that determine the purpose and the course of his life. That values are things that one retains to gain and or keep. And what those values are will determine the course of your life. And if you choose to be parasitical, that you've written the course of your life in one sense, than from that person who decides to be productive. So values are objective in the sense of, like, life-sustaining actions requires a specific course of action. If you are to achieve life and to have a quality of life, you have to look at the facts of reality in order to achieve those values, which will bring about that result. And if you decide to pursue another course of action, such as plundering and parasitism and laziness or whatnot, you'll achieve quite a different thing. But that's not inherent by human fiat. That's just determined by the facts of reality.
Mm.
Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and go to the ANCAP, or the subjective theory of value, asking a question of the labor theory of value.
You want to ask a question this time?
It's our turn to ask a question.
All right, Victor, let me start first, and you can go after me. I do appreciate your patience. So I got a question. What is the difference, then, between somebody producing rape for an hour and somebody producing a car? It's 1 hour. It's technically, under the labor theory of value, equitable, correct?
No, not at all. Because in the more Marxian standpoint of the labor theory of value that I am coming from, that is not about the subjective preferences within people's minds, and that's what I think the essential failure of subjectivist value theory hinges on. When we talk about economic values, we are not talking about the inherent kind of subjective preferences that I would have in evaluating the course of action that I take within my life. What we are talking about is a certain object created in economic life to sustain the economic system, and that is a value, a commodity, something that has exchange value, which means exchangeability on the market. And so what Marx was talking about in the kind of equivalent value scenario, in his book Capital, where he was talking about the linen being equivalent to the coat and all of that, what he was talking about was the equivalent values insofar as other values relate to each other. So if value is an exchangeability on the market, then the only way something can even take the form of value is to even become a value is to have relation to other values and have equivalent relations. Something is only exchangeable on the market insofar as it is exchangeable with another thing that is exchangeable, right? So what happens is every value is equivalent to another value. All commodities are equivalent in value to each other, and that makes up the form of value, the general universe of value, which kind of comprises this whole thing. It's a web. It's a web of exchangeable things that have exchangeability in the market system, and that comprise the order of capital, as Marx would probably put it. So this is what the equivalent is talking about. It's not talking about, oh well, if I put X amount of labor into making a hat, that is automatically equivalent to the same amount of labor I put into cutting someone's skull off or something. It's talking about the exchangeability of things on the market, commodities, and their relation to each other.
Okay, so then I guess we'll go ahead and go to a question from the labor theory of value to the subjective theory of value.
Okay. Okay, so earlier you were talking about how you feel that the labor theory of value is constructed to kind of give justification for the collectivist kind of exploitation of the individual and the suppression of individual choices and individual freedoms. And I want to ask you, do you feel that there is any credence to the idea that the bourgeois side of the value theory is actually kind of made to abstract from the exploitation, the inherent exploitation and unseen coercion within the market system?
Well, I'm trying to understand what unseen coercion is, because if it's coercion, it's truly going to be a visible thing. If you make a threat to somebody else.
Well, but like what I mean with unseen is like in the market, I feel that there are certain types of coercion, and the coercion of the market itself is kind of, there is a cover over it. So I may have a choice between individual commodities that I exchange and put subjective value on, but I do not have a choice insofar as the property relations that make up the market economy are actually influencing my choices.
All right, fair enough. Well, see, I don't look at it as exploitation because, listen, everybody, even the business owners, we all live in the same world, and if there's only 15,000 square miles of land that's on the beach, well, not everybody's going to be able to have a beach house, right? I mean, we're going to have to come to that realization. A lot of people might want them, but only a few people. There's just not enough. There's scarcity, right? And that's nobody's fault. It's not any one person's fault or God's fault or whatever you want to turn to, some other deity. It's just the way it is, right? There's just scarcity, and it's not always human created through, what's that thing called? Where things automatically, purposely break after 5 years. You know what I'm trying to talk about? The zeitgeist or something.
Entropy?
Yeah, entropy. That's one of them. But I think one of the things here to look at is, who is really being exploited. So you have this. You're talking about employees being exploited by business owners. To me, it's the business owner who takes the risk. He has to put his own capital up for the machinery to buy the house, to buy the factory. He takes all risks for any lawsuits, insurance. He doesn't get paid maybe for 3 to 7 years until his company's profitable. But all the employee has to do is walk into this one building without ever having to do any other work. Hold on, let me finish. I gave you time.
No, but like this is relevant to the question though, because
Okay, wait. It is what this particular format is the one side does not interrupt the other.
no. But like I'm just
I
saying.
understand what you're wanting to say. It doesn't matter. It is
Doesn't
one
matter.
side
No,
does
it's
not
going off
interrupt the
the
other.
course of the question.
Don't
That's
interrupt.
what I interrupted for. It's going off the course. I want to just kind of make sure that
It goes off on the question. That's his prerogative.
It's on point, and I'm just continually being interrupted. Please add 20.
Okay. Okay, sorry.
All right. So I'm sure you're pretty new to debates, obviously, but we allow others to finish their time. So what happens is the business owner has not had or has had to put all this time and effort and risk and money and everything that he has day and night, wondering if this company will make it over the next 3 years so where they can make a profit. And all the employee has to do is walk in, write down some scribbles on some paperwork called an application, job application, get hired. He gets paid that week, within a couple of weeks, whether the company's making money or not. I mean, who is really getting exploited here? You can't say. We can't value this. You're trying to put an objective value on things that there's no way to value. That guy who doesn't have to go all that time, he didn't have to worry about the company being put together. He doesn't have any risk. You don't put that into your equation. So why are you excluding most of the real parts of the reality of the life that should be part of this equation? The labor theory of value is very biased. Well, at least the subjective theory of value says it could be either. You could be right, or maybe the other people are exploiting them. You know what? Why don't we just let people come to their own decisions, Victor?
Yeah. No. To coattail on that, Mike. The issue with the Marxist exploitation theory is that it does rest on false premises. Sheer physical force and labor are of little use if they are not directed by careful thought, so as to contribute most efficiently. Yes, it does take labor, of course, to construct a factory, but you can't toss 50 directionless people into a lot with nothing but their muscles and no plan, no blueprint, no leadership, no investment, no capital investment, let alone with no application of architecture and engineering, work that is extremely intellectual, and expect an industrial society to continue, let alone begin. Raw muscular strength alone will not bring about anything that contributes meaningfully to production. And yes, and those who argue that those who command large fortunes have an authority that is quantitatively very similar to those who command armies is ridiculous. But the initiation of force refers specifically to actual physical force, not, for instance, refusing to provide somebody with a job, or so as to load the dice by providing somebody with a job. I mean, the entrepreneur is damned when he does provide somebody with a job, and then he's damned if he's not provided somebody with a job. I saw a banner recently that said, "Capitalism doesn't work. We have a right to jobs." So, intellectual, self-contradictory, self-canceling dissonance is the issue at hand.
I actually saw that on your Facebook page, and I mean, even as a socialist, I don't believe that anybody's entitled to a job. I think they're entitled to, not suffer for, the place in which they're born. I don't think there should be a caste system.
All right, we'll get a chance for you guys to give commentary and responses back to each other on these different topics after this question and answer session. Currently, there is 5 minutes and 55 seconds saved by the LTV team and 1 minute and 44 seconds saved by the subjective theory of value team, or STV. So at this time, we have a question that will be coming from the STV team to the LTV team.
Go ahead, Victor. I asked the last one.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Basically, as I've already touched on so far, and whoever cares to answer the question, I really want to get my head around. And I don't want to misrepresent, of which I've probably been accused of misrepresenting the labor theory of value position. But when it comes to the so-called bourgeois, the capitalist, the entrepreneur, is it being put forth that they are not working, that there's no labor being put forward there? And if they are, what exactly is the complaint? I mean, it just means that all people are laboring and producing values.
It is not to say that the quote-unquote entrepreneur, the bourgeois, or whatever you want to call the person. I don't even think that entrepreneur and bourgeois are
synonymous
concepts. I think that those are two different things. But like to answer your question, using the kind of words that you were using, no, it doesn't say that. But I think the problem here is, yeah, I mean, everybody in an economy works. I mean, you have to work. Like, labor is required to even live. Obviously, I don't think anybody would contest that. But the thing is that, yes, everybody might be working, but some people are benefited by the work, and some people are disadvantaged by the work. That's not to say that that's a kind of all-encompassing thing, that there is one group of people that is always disadvantaged and there's another group of people that is always, advantaged. That's quite the opposite of what I think. But what I would say in that regard as to how a capitalist society exploits people is that it's made up of certain property relations that exist within the market, within what I call the law of value, and what Marx called the law of value. And I think that those relations are fundamentally oppressive and exploitative because it is about property relations that are enforced from the top down onto other people, and that property being used for leverage in extracting what Marx called surplus value, in extracting things from other people. And we can see that just on the basic relations that you go into every day on the market. If you require, let's say, a certain, a good, just let's say in the abstract, a good. If you require a good, you do not get together with other people in the society and try to coordinate things as best as possible to benefit everybody as much as possible. Rather, you have these spontaneous exchanges of property that is enforced from the top down, where one person has leverageable control compared to you over something, and says, all right, well, if you require this thing, if you have a desire for this thing, if you need it for a given end, which is basically what desire is, then you have to exchange with me X thing, because I have leverageable control over this piece of property that you desire, need, whatever you want to call it. And so what's happening is that there's differential there's an unequal balance of power in which some people have power over others and can use that power to extract and command other people at their wish. And that's why the bourgeois are viewed as exploitative, because they own production. They own the very things that we all need to sustain ourselves. And so thus they have the right to leverage that control over other people.
Well, I can certainly respond to that, but I don't know if I'm breaking the
Yes, you would. Yes, you would. All right, you get a chance to respond at the end of the 4 questions for each side. All
Wait,
right.
I have a request.
Yes. Okay.
Can we bring Kenji on here to decide what is and isn't mathematical?
No.
Aw.
All right. So then let's go ahead and have the question from the labor theory of value to the subjective theory of value.
Okay. Well, so I'm wondering, and I'm curious, because I don't feel I'm kind of, it's interesting to me, and so if value is completely subjective, right, even in the preference form that you're talking about, how do you feel then that there can be any metric for how people are done wrong against? Because if value is completely subjective, then who's to say that other people were exploited? Who's to say that other people were oppressed? Who's to say that other people were hurt in any way? Because everything is completely subjective. We have no objective facts to measure the kind of subjective morality that we're drawing from, and that's that's the basis of all even subjective theories about morality, and morality is obviously subjective. So if this preference, if even preference is completely subjective, then how do we have even a measurement to know if the state is exploiting people by taking taxes?
All right, let me cover that one first, Victor. And Robert, you might want to restart the clock. All right, so we have a society where we know that property rights can exist without having a valuation for every single piece of property out there monopolized throughout the entire world, right? So in other words, you can drink a drink of water and not have to know exactly the amount of utils that you'll get from drinking that water, right? So in other words, just because somebody's been done wrong, let's say somebody harmed somebody else, so they'll pollute on somebody else's land, or they broke somebody's, they ran into somebody else's bike with their bicycle, and they ran into somebody else's bike and it dented their bike. How do we know the value of the damage that's been created? At this point, you can have a somewhat good idea. The best way that humans have found to somewhat transpose this over into the real world is trying to find an aggregate. So the pricing of replacing the unit, maybe not that this necessarily has to be the lowest quality build, but and then usually arbiters can come to this conclusion on their own without having to steal money from other people and property. So you have somebody else that's harmed somebody else's property. What's the cost of replacing it? Usually that, especially if it was an accident. If it was on purpose, sometimes some arbiters will make them pay back 2 or 3 times the cost of it. And it's kind of a common law thing that just gets set in stone over the years. I mean, it doesn't have to have, you can have property rights without having every single piece of property or item that is property technically having a value. Go ahead, Victor.
Yeah, no, I've advanced the idea of the feasibility and desirability of combining Austrian economics and, let's say, Ayn Rand's objectivism, or let's say objectivism, small o, in the effort to develop the strongest possible conceptual and moral case for a free market society. After all, there's thousands of people who have cited the works of both Ludwig von Mises and Ayn Rand as major influences in their lives, and I'm certainly no exception. However, there are those who will provide cautionary statements, of course, suggesting that you can't reconcile Misesian praxeology subjectivism with Rand's objectivism, but there are certainly many compatible aspects between these schools of thought. They don't cancel each other out whatsoever. As I've already suggested at the outset of what I said before, it's quite okay if somebody prefers chocolate ice cream over vanilla. It's quite a different thing, however, when it comes to initiatory violence to that of retaliatory violence. So the general advocacy of capitalism and free markets, notwithstanding that one is based on value neutrality, as in the Misesian position, is because of the reason that he was an economist. He wasn't a philosopher. So when it comes to philosophy, though, there is a moral and objective case to be made for a free market economy. And as far as that's concerned, the objective theory of values is the only moral theory compatible with the rule of force. Capitalism is the only system based explicitly on an objective theory of values from a philosophical standpoint, not necessarily just an economic one. So if one knows that the good is objective, determined by the nature of reality, not individual dictatorial fiat, and it has to be discovered by the human mind, one knows that an attempt to achieve the good, or values for that sake, by physical force is a horrible contradiction, which negates morality right at the root by destroying a human being's capacity to recognize the good. His capacity to value, his very capacity to value, is if it's undercut by physical force, eradicates values from the outset. Any kind of value, subjective or objective.
And remember, if you want to take some of the time that you've banked, go ahead and continue if you want.
Are you okay?
I have more time. Yeah. Do you want to close that? Like,
time if we can. I mean, go ahead and finish it. We got plenty of time. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Take another case of objectivity. Just as there's no dichotomy between human rights and property rights, it's a false dichotomy. There is no clash between consumers and producers. There is no clash between the so-called bourgeois and the workers. In a free market, if you are a consumer, you are a producer. Nature does not grant anyone an innate title of consumer. It's a title that has to be earned, and it's earned by production. Production is primary. One cannot consume that which has not been produced. So only producers constitute a market. Only people who trade products or services for products or services. In the role of producers, they represent a market supply, and in the role of consumers, they represent a market's demand. So the law of supply and demand has an implicit subclause that it involves the same people in both capacities. That's an objective fact. There's no dichotomy.
All right, let's.
Okay, so now we're going to have a question from the STV to the LTV.
All right, let me go ahead and take this one, Victor. So, guys, we have 10 hot dogs that were just produced, right? Under the labor theory of value, those hot dogs are equitable. So why did you stop? Why did you eat one, and maybe even two, but you stopped on the third? Didn't you? Why don't you just continue to get all that great value and eat 100 or a million or infinity hot dogs?
Well, because again,
I have enough energy to do my labor.
But you're.
I'm sorry. I know where you're going with this, and I just kind of wanted to undercut that a little bit, and it didn't quite come out right. We all know it's like because I didn't want to, and I know that's where you're going with this, and you're going to say that that's a subjective thing. But I just wanted to be clever for that moment.
All right, so let's have the subjective.
Jake.
Having Jake or labor theory of value. Go ahead and continue with whatever.
Like what I was saying was, it's because again, what I'm talking about in the sense of value, is value in the commodity sense, value in the economic sense, and that is what's called a value, a commodity, something that has an exchange ratio in the market, something that is exchangeable on the market, in the market system, with other commodities, other things that are exchangeable on the market system. So what I'm talking about is not even, I'm not even going into the realm of subjective preferences with economic value, at least in my view. I'm going into the realm of commodities, a completely different area. And again, you're kind of starting out from an incorrect premise, which is that I would view the hot dogs just as they were produced as equivalent in value. They only enter into the universe of value insofar as that they are exchangeable on the market. So it has, just because hot dogs are produced doesn't mean that they're going to be values. There has to be a set of social institutions that are there for hot dogs to be values, for anything to be values, and there has to be, labor to create those hot dogs, right? So what I'm saying, at least create them as values. So what I'm saying is basically that value, to me, is not this trans-historical idea of human subjective preference. Again, as I've said many times, it's the idea of exchangeability on the market, and that's to me what value is. It's a commodity, something that is exchangeable on the market.
And may I go into something real quick?
Yes.
Robert?
Of course.
Okay. And I'd like to go into why certain items are expensive and others are not. Now, somebody could argue that the reason that diamonds are so expensive is because they're beautiful and they have these certain traits, but one could argue, like I would imagine Jake and I are both thinking this, is that the reason diamonds are so expensive is because they're scarce and they take a lot of labor to obtain and refine and all of that, and that labor needs to be compensated for when the final product is put on the market. Jake, can you take over? Because I didn't,
Yeah, so what he's talking about is what I would call the transformation problem and the price form, right? So how values translate into prices. And I would say, from my standpoint, that prices become a thing in the relations of values to each other. So what happens is, insofar as that other things are exchangeable with, or that things are exchangeable with each other, they take a price form. A price comes out of that, kind of, a set. Even though we know what price is, a set metric for, what someone is willing to give use something, for, obviously. So that's a price, obviously. And so what happens is, insofar as that things are exchangeable with each other on the market, they take that price form, because exchange in this kind of, way entails, price, obviously. And so that's kind of how it comes. And so since exchangeability on the market comes from labor, the price itself comes as a result of how much labor that is put into a given set of commodities, right? So since commodities are measured in their labor, in the labor that's put into them, the price that comes from the relations of commodities to each other, the fact that value exists, that price is also measured in the labor that is put into the commodities that are, given a price.
Okay, so we have 5 minutes and 5 seconds still banked for the LTV and 0 banked for STV. And we have a question from STV for STV from LTV.
Okay.
Oh, can I take this one? Can I take this one? I'd really like to.
Yeah, you may, because I don't have very many questions.
Yeah, I figured you might be running out.
Yeah.
Okay. Earlier, Michael, you said you claimed that to the labor theory of value, to someone who subscribes to that to them, an hour of laboring a rape or feeding the homeless would be like akin, but I'm not really. I don't understand that, because the way I see it is that the value that comes from labor is really proportional to the ability of that labor to generate revenue. Like, that rape isn't making any money. Like, there's not a, that rape isn't useful. So could you please answer that question?
Yeah, sure. I think it's important to point out that prostitutes make a lot of money, and for a reason. They provide the service of sex. Now, sex comes either voluntarily or involuntarily, but some people are willing to pay thousands and thousands of dollars for sex, right? Some people are willing to pay thousands and thousands of dollars to have an automobile made as well. Now, in this case, we know that the rapist would gain, he'd save, instead of having to go out and get an escort that cost $1,000 or $500, he just saved all that money. Basically, he just bought it, but he saved the money and he just pocketed the cash and put it. So there's value that he's definitely gained from that transaction. And if we actually define terms here, this is why I like to define the terms up front. The labor theory of value is quoted, also known as the cost theory of value, because I like to really refer to it as the cost theory of value instead. It states that the value of goods and services are determined by the amount of labor required. It doesn't say, there's no cliff note here that says, oh, and it has to be tradable out in the real world. There's no little thing that says, well, other people have to like it or hate it. It doesn't say any of that. It just simply says that the value of goods and services are determined by the amount of labor required to produce said goods and services. If it's an hour, then it's an hour, no matter what you're doing, whether it's relaxation. You can produce relaxation, right? You're still doing, your blood's pumping, your heart's, you're breathing. You're still producing even when you're relaxing. It's just you're producing a state of calm in your body, right? You're relaxing. That's still a form of production, though. So, and once again, because it's a state of mind, we can't value it. It's just ridiculous to try to objectify this value on something that's so subjective. So it's really about defining the terms here. Is that when we look back at the cost theory of value, it states that the value of goods and services is determined by the amount of labor required to produce the goods and services. An hour is an hour. So I'm just taking the definition. So it's not really my thing. I'm just looking at what the world has produced for me around me and saying, well, this is the value they say. This is what they term this, coin that is. So you can see why most people would think, well, an hour is an hour, and it's equitable across anything. Victor, go ahead.
Yeah, maybe if you could just quickly reiterate the question. So
the question is, how is it that you conflate the idea that there is a value given in a activity that is desired versus an activity that isn't desired? Isn't that the question?
My specific question, it was really for Michael specifically, because it was about something he said earlier. But I mean, you can comment if you like. It was he said that the value, like how do you subscribe to the labor theory of value when that could make the rape, like the labor expended in rape, akin to labor expended in feeding the homeless, or something like that. And I wanted to know how he, conflated that idea, because how I see the labor theory of value is that labor, which generates revenue, is really what's being referenced, and not just in the terms of thermodynamics what energy is being expended or for how long.
Right, and I pointed out that the rapist was gaining revenue.
Yeah.
It's okay. We can move on.
We can move on. The
All right.
question.
Okay, then let's go ahead and move on.
Question.
At this point, where each side gets 5 minutes to rebut or just, respond to anything that was said in the previous questions. So at this point, we're going to go with the labor theory of value. You've got 5 minutes to go ahead and comment.
I mean, I guess what I'm just going to sum up is that, to me, the subjective theory of value is really nothing more than what they feel the labor theory of value is. I feel that it's nothing more than a control mechanism pushed by, the establishment to further its existence. If we look at the establishment, how it's structured on bourgeois economy. It's structured on, bourgeois society. And the people, who benefit from bourgeois society do not, the most at least, do not want that to end. And so they push things like the subjective theory of value because they want to abstract from the inherent coercion and inherent exploitation of the system of capital, of the market, of capitalism, and, abstract it. And this is like the whole, the Austrian theory and any form of bourgeois kind of economic theory is based on abstracting from the real world and not taking into account all of the factors that would go into evaluating the world around us and bourgeois economy and just the world in general. It's about abstracting from the extraction of surplus value. It's about abstracting from the inherent coercive property relations that are inherently backed by state power. It's about abstracting from that and kind of feeding into the illusion that the market produces by making, giving us kind of the illusion of freedom. We have kind of a notion that, since we can choose between Coke and Pepsi, that we are free, or at least that we're autonomous actors and we're not.
That we have that even though we're in an ultimatum, when you look at it abstractly from a lot of viewpoints, that really, when we're asked to choose between Coke and Pepsi, like, we don't have our own third option. Well, what if I want to drink root beer? But a lot of people don't take into account that no, the only options are Coke and Pepsi, and people think that those two choices, which were ultimately given to you by somebody with authority, that gives you freedom, and that laws can give you freedom or something like that. But I mean, we all already know this. We're anarchists, and we've all thought about this. I think what we're really getting at is the same thing, but from different standpoints.
You want to make the time?
Yeah, let's save the time.
Okay, so then 5 minutes for the opposing side.
Well, you have listed that we each had 5 minutes.
Oh, is it 5 minutes each?
Yes, sir. Each person.
Each person? No, it's 5. Let's see.
No, I'm pretty sure you said 5.
Person. You're right. Sorry, 5 minutes for each person.
I thought I was pretty sure you said 5 minutes for each slide, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I thought it was for teams as well.
Each person.
Talk about the instructions.
if you guys on the ANCOM side, if you cut yourself short thinking that's understandable.
All right, so you guys still have 7 minutes and 5 seconds, so you're welcome to use that at any point in time.
I'd like to socialize those minutes. Share them.
All right.
No.
So let's go ahead and go to Michael. You've got 5 minutes.
I just want to say thank you for doing the capitalist thing of you with your private property minutes and allowing them to be shared. First of all, I want to state that you had earlier stated that it was, quote, you can't have a commodity without labor, unquote. And I want to say that, let me ask the question to you. Are you saying you can't value, it's a rhetorical question, so don't answer it, please. You can't value water without jumping or swimming? That's what it sounds like to me. It's like, well, what is work? You're trying to objectify this, or labor, once again, you're trying to objectify exactly what labor is, like, because thinking is labor, once again, and producing the relaxation is a form of labor. It's just really easy labor. So, this ideal that you can't have a commodity without labor, to me, I find that silly. I value the water that falls out of the sky, and nobody has to work for that water to fall, right? It just does it naturally. Now, one of the things here that we need to understand is that there's a disagreement between STV and LTV, right? And that in its very self is proving the subjective theory of value. I also want to say, you guys obviously, this is one of the questions I had, maybe you can rebut it here later on, maybe write it down for a note for later. But obviously you guys keep talking about how pricing and LTV is relative to what it's traded for in the market or by others or whatever you want to call it. But my whole thing is, do you acknowledge really that's just pushing STV back one step, right? I mean, that's really what I'm trying to say here is the LTV is always chasing STV. That's what it always is. And really, if you look at history, in regions that have really experienced and have civilizations that were really heavy Marxist thinkers in LTV, they were usually the ones who were exploited the most. If it wasn't, such like in Russia, I know a lot of you guys don't want to say that was communist or Marxist, but a lot of us, that was the biggest push towards Marxism ever seen in history, and that's what it produced. Whether that was the end result that you wanted or not is a different story. But what we can see is that the LTV has created actually the most exploitation, because what it ends up doing is creating politicians, this hierarchy group of people in the state, and then they, people run to them saying, "Oh, make me not as bad as the capitalists are doing to me." And what they do is make it worse, right? Once again, it's a flawed dichotomy to have capitalists, bourgeois, and proletariat. I don't believe in that whole world. But the whole ideal here that the LTV really, to me, is what creates the most exploitation. And you hear people say that it's free thought, because that's what we're really talking about here, is people trying to objectify thoughts. And really, I think that the subjective theory of value is nothing but free thought. You have, as close as you're going to ever get to free thought. You can say that there's some bad things in the world and scarcity exists, and you might have no choice but for that root beer. Hey, I also don't have the ability to go fly a space shuttle right now. It's not capitalism's fault, right? If anything, capitalism's getting me there quicker. SpaceX, etc. NASA, when's the last time they put somebody on the moon? I mean, decades. And I don't want them to spend any money doing that either. It's going to be a waste. So the establishment, you keep bringing this up. What exactly is the establishment? To me, the establishment is the state, which is the only system that has the legal right to initiate violence on other peaceful people. Property relations, you keep negatively, you have this negative connotation towards property relations and property rights. But what we have found, especially after the escaping of the Malthusian trap for thousands and thousands of years, where workers' real wages never increased, you got a little bit of property, and workers' real wages increased 12-fold. Never before have people been better off in their whole lives. We found that property relations actually have the opposite effect in a consequentialist perspective. They reduce conflict, and this they do by giving individuals borders, to where the Hitlers, Stalins, Bushes, and Cheneys, and the ANCOMs of the world cannot aggress across those borders of the individual. We understand that it's free will and free choice at its very base here. I think one of the things that we have to realize here is that the tyranny of the labor theory of value, that you can force an objective value on others. The subjective theory of value is in no way indicating that you have to value anything ever, whereas the labor theory of value will not only tell you what it is, but enforce it on you as well. Victor?
Right, yeah, it's a common belief inherited from Marx that governments are necessarily an agent of economic interests, and that the political systems are to be defined in terms of whose economic interests they serve. So typically capitalists Capitalism rather, is commonly regarded as a system in which the state predominantly acts to serve the interests of the business class, and socialism, the working class, and which is just out and outright false. It certainly is. If to argue that as a case against Mike and myself would be arguing a straw man. That's not our position, obviously. Plus, what's more, the bourgeois, that was Marx's catch-all slur he used to dismiss any argument he found difficult or inconvenient, which we see tonight, even from his adherents. Marx and his philosophical offspring dismiss out of hand the entire system of thought from the Western canon because they had allegedly been conceived by bourgeois theorists trying to excuse their own rapacious exploitation and greed. And this ad hominem slur even extends to important philosophers who've contributed to the development of individual rights and property rights. John Locke and his ilk, you see, they had articulated political theories of individual rights and thus property rights, and so they are just bourgeois apologists, you see. And they argue that those who command large fortunes have an authority that's quantitatively different from those who command armies. They can't separate the two, and I just find that absolutely astounding that they can't differentiate the difference between somebody who gives you a job and somebody who puts a bullet to your temple. It's not the same thing. And in fact, just kind of like coattailing on what Mike was just talking about there in regards to the existential consequentialist, as you want to call it, that results of capitalism, all of mankind's history is the practical demonstration of a basic principle. The degree of human prosperity, achievement, and progress is the direct function and corollary of the degree of physical freedom. You have ancient Greece, the Renaissance. You have the 19th century. It was not a full, unregulated, totally laissez-faire capitalism. That's true. Various degrees of government interference and control still remained. But to the extent to which centuries were free, was those centuries, the ones that I cited, was the extent of their economic progress. And in the 19th century, America, the freest, to the degree that it was, achieved the most. There was an explosion of wealth, and that was the direct result of capitalism, as philosophically defined, not by the Marxist coloring book that swashed all over it. So in the attempt to vilify capitalism, there is this relentless point of attack by collectivist academics who wail that the low wages and the harsh living conditions of the early years of capitalism, to go on and on about that, but capitalism did not create poverty. It inherited from previous centuries in which the rule of physical force was used against people. I could go on and on, but I don't know how much time I have.
Well, if I might add on this real quick, Victor, I know we have that 1.5 minutes left. I wanted to say, you were talking about the divisions, bourgeois, proletariat, and that's what it comes down to. Is I see the labor theory of value creating fighting, division, hate. It forces unity, which I don't think is plausible. The STV on the flip side says, you know what, it's okay to be different. It's okay to be an individual. It's okay to have your own thoughts, and it welcomes tolerance. It welcomes tolerance versus the hatred that's shown from the other side. It's kind of like the labor theory of value. It's like bombing for peace, just economically.
Well, yeah, as I suggested, it's a false economy. There is no proletarian workers, or bourgeois and proletariat rather. It's class division. It's an arbitrary divide, and that there's an intrinsic clash between the two.
Okay, so you guys have 12 minutes and 10 seconds for the save banked for LTV, and we have 1 minute and 43 seconds banked for the STV. And this time we're going. At this time, we're going to go ahead and go into the interrogation mode section. So at this point, the people from the labor theory of value are going to be able to direct the conversation, to dictate that we're going on to a new subject if they've gotten the answer that they wanted from the people from the subjective theory of value, and they'll be able to move on by saying, move on. And so they get to direct exactly how they want the conversation to go, and they can interrupt the other side at any time. So
Okay.
you guys have the forum. You're going to be able to ask any questions that you want of the people on the subjective theory of value. You get to 25 minutes to basically interrogate them. So here we go.
So I am the state, and I have the right to take away their property time rights. Is that correct?
Yes.
Awesome.
All right. Can I get into something as soon as I remember it?
I mean, like, this is just what I want to kind of get across here, and this is what I'm seeing with the kind of dialogue that's being mounted. I don't think that this is an actually accurate representation. I don't think that any of these arguments that they've been presenting are actually accurate representations of the labor theory of value. First of all, they're erroneously attaching Marxian value theory, or parts of it, to the labor theory of value. And as I noted before, the labor theory of value is not inherently connected to Marxian theory. Rather, Marxian value theory is simply a kind of, I guess, version of the labor theory of value. There's also the classical version, which, completely, in a lot of ways, completely abstracted from Marx's theory and was completely different. So we cannot attach Marx's ideas, which, the kind of ideas that you presented as Marx's ideas were kind of like, that wasn't, like, there were oversimplifications, straw men, not accurate in any way. And, well, they were accurate in some ways. People very rarely get anything, get every single thing wrong. But, they were very, very, not accurate is what I was saying. So.
All right, Jake, may I encourage you to ask questions at this time? This is where your opportunity to basically, push them for what it is that you want to know about their position.
Oh, I actually have a question.
Because I don't have very many questions.
All right, yeah, I think Jake's gonna appreciate this question. All right, so as far as the way I see it, socialism and communism basically emphasize the collective, all of the people, as opposed to the few. And the way I see capitalism, it emphasizes who can gain the most capital. It's about the individual and them gaining their personal money. Now, how can you say that in that system an individual couldn't use their money to gain a monopoly on force? As you see, if there's a collective, then there's not exactly a monopoly, because there's dissent and there's conversations, and there's in an anarchist society there's no hierarchy, there's no leadership or anything of that nature, so there's no one person that has the monopoly. Now, in capitalism, if there's an individual, with all that influence and clout, how can you say that they wouldn't themselves be acting as a state?
I think, though, this should have to do with value theory.
Yeah, who's going to answer that question? You have a question before you.
Yeah.
Summarize it real quick, one more time.
Okay, in socialism and communism, the collective, a group of people, basically, have influence. But in capitalism, it seems that the individual has more influence than a group, inherently making them sort of a state, in a sense, in that they can influence more, they can act more force onto another person than the other person would be able to act onto them.
Okay, well, I have my whole goal here is to make every single individual their own monopoly so that they're not owned and controlled by others. That's my number one goal, is to end the control of other human beings. Now, in a free society, you might not have the choice of root beer, right? But nobody can force you to buy Coca-Cola in a true free society.
But in the society that you're talking about, they definitely can. Because
yeah, they can
overarching property relations that dictate, like I was talking about before, the leverage of control that these property relations of the system of capital give you.
If
they
I
can
don't want
affect
to buy
condition.
Coca-Cola, I do not have to buy Coca-Cola.
They can affect
Nobody in a free society is going to make me buy
There are a
Coca-Cola.
lot of people that do. There are a lot of people that don't have another
Maybe in a free society today, maybe we have to pay for subsidies today, but that's not in a free society of private property. We live in a...
I think this idea of a quote unquote free society with private property is a complete illusion. There is no such thing. Private property and the capitalist system are inherently coercive.
If those that are selling coke have too much power, they can create conditions in other people's lives in which they're only able to buy coke. It's really just as simple as that, is that if you have enough influence, you can make it so that people are reliant on you. I mean, that's why we have, like, people today having their water bottled by Coke and Pepsi, is because those companies have made, like, conditions in a way that people can only get their water that way in places like West Virginia, or in, I don't know, wherever else the fuck fracking is legal, and they make the water essentially poisonous and unfit to drink.
The water in my house right here has nothing to do with Coca-Cola. I can get water from lots of places. I don't have to buy Dasani. You know, I can buy Pure Life. I can buy Evian. I can buy.
The thing with that is, though,
Culligan.
You're using your own personal experience to abstract from the broader system that we're talking about here. In the broader system, many people are deprived because of these property relations. Many people are deprived from even the basic necessities of life, no less, you know, having even access to the choice of Coca-Cola or Pepsi. Right?
This is why I was talking earlier.
You're not giving us examples. You got to give me some example. You're just saying,
I have an example.
No, I'll definitely go into that. I'll do that right now. Since I was gonna say, since you guys like to deal with the hypothetical examples a lot. Obviously, I've seen it a number of times in discussions with ANCAPs. So here's what I would suggest as an example. So as an example, the American workforce, right? They are they're very overworked at this point. They are the average working class person. You know, I know you don't think, but you know, it's meant to conjure up a given image. Like the average working person doesn't own a company, just works for a living, etc. Right? That average person is likely to be extremely overworked because in our society, the capitalists have used the control over the production that they have, the control over the workplace, the control over the access to the very means of life that they have, to force workers to, number one, you know, have their wages stop rising, have them stagnate. Number two, have to take loans from banks in order to make up for that stagnation.
At exorbitant interest rates, might I add.
Number three, add interest also. And number three, increase their profits. And they have all done that. They've done that all. It has something to do with the state, you know, as I'm sure you will say, and I get that. But that's the thing. This control over production, this private property, this kind of exclusive control over the production that we all rely on to sustain ourselves,
it can inherently take away the freedom of other people.
By the state power. Because if I have control over production, that means I have the right to control every single other person in society because we all rely on production. And thus, for me to control production, I must be able to mold society in such a way that I can do what I want.
There's no such thing as production as it's a thing. You're acting like it's a quantifiable, objective, tangible type of reality. That's not at all how it works. I mean,
let's take a factory. Let's use a factory as an example. The factory owner, let's say Karl Marx's buddy, Frederick Engels, or whatever his name was that you ANCAPs love to bring up so much, he owns a factory. Now, there's people working in that factory, but old Frederick Engels is in control of their wages and, you know, whether or not they can continue to work there. Now, if they don't work for the, you know, wages that Frederick Engels is willing to pay, which, for the sake of argument, let's say are unlivable. Like, this is accounting for inflation, this is like a 50-cent an hour wage. You can't live on that. You can barely eat. Frederick Engels, because of that, can fire them. Now, in this hypothetical country, there's a large workforce and not very many places to work. Now, that means that Frederick Engels needs to expend less labor to get more workers to work for him at terrible wages. He's thereby manipulating the conditions of life for other people and taking away their freedom and their power to determine their own destiny.
Every
Every
premise that this starts with sounds like, okay, so we have a third world country, which, as we know statistically from the indices of economic freedom, that countries with the most collectivism, the less amount of property rights, are more likely to be third world and second world countries. That these regions, actually, in this region here,
at all. The countries that are third world are that way because they've had, these kind of they have had these kinds of unregulated market systems shoved down their throats. That's the reason they're third world.
Unregulated, they have like 4 times more regulations than the U.S. in the third world regions. There's so much government. The government has turned so inefficient it like collapses on itself.
Not really.
1991.
The market, the business there, the markets there. They don't have any safety regulations. They don't have any regulations for the conditions that workers need to be in.
The governments have more
regulations for the wages. They don't have any, like what you're talking about is a complete fantasy world that only exists on Mises.com.
You're the one who's just talking about hypothetical. I'm telling you right now, the third world regions over there, you look it up, they have more regulations, more taxes.
No, they don't. That's literally both.
So much more government. It's up
No,
to here.
This connects to what I was saying earlier.
They can't enforce the rules because the government has collapsed on itself.
No, there's no regulation. The government is not. There's no this overarching like strangulatory regulatory government that you're imagining doesn't exist if they can't enforce those rules. Now does it?
This connects to what I was talking about earlier. Now, the reason those collectivist countries are so impoverished has a lot to do with U.S. sanctions, and the U.S. was using all of their money that they have control over to take away the power of other countries. Now, by imposing those sanctions,
right?
Their money, they can't buy things from those countries. Cuba can't sell their cigars to us.
The communism that's in those regions, socialism at least, that's in those regions, the very
communism, the market systems that's that's communism to you?
Wait, let me talk for a second. I let you talk.
I am the state. I have the right to take away the property rights of time, as Robert denoted.
So. I will let you talk.
You have a question? Do you have a question for Michael?
No, I was engaging in the dialogue that we were talking about.
We can talk. I can't talk for. I can't even. I start a thing for 5 seconds. I get interrupted. So it's like, if you research the Index of Economic Freedom, it shows you the more tariffs, the more taxes, all of these heavy regulations and fees and mandates. It's out the wazoo. It's factual, consequential information, subjective information, right in front of your face. I mean,
right. So where are you getting these statistics from?
Well, the Index of Economic Freedom. I don't like.
Familiarize me for the sake of like the discussion. Familiarize me with the Index of Economic Freedom.
Who writes them as well?
I don't like their anarchist organization personally, but the Cato Institute put out. But it's not like they.
So you mean the institute that's subject to front groups that literally writes information for special interests.
But they can't say. But the facts that they produce are well known throughout the world. It's a fact.
They're not. If you go to regions,
it doesn't matter who
tell them. You have like.
If it's a tariff rate that was produced in 2009, that's a tariff rate no matter what anybody else says or does. That's the reality of the world.
Okay, so
the tariff rate's the tariff rate. You can't make. They can't change.
What do you mean? Familiarize me with that concept. What are you talking about there?
The Index of Economic Freedom goes in ranks.
Who produced the Index of Economic Freedom?
Go over to Cato and go research it.
Cato? Again, they write information for special interests.
I hate Cato, but that is right. I hate Cato, but that is right.
Okay, how do you know that is right? What sources do you have to back that up?
It's factual. They say, here's the
factual. Tell me why I can sit here and say the labor theory of value is factual all I want. It doesn't mean it's true.
No. If the tax rate in 1997 was 32.9%, that never changes. That's a fact. That's objective. How do you not understand that?
How is this Index of Economic Freedom?
Every year. They update it every day. They update it all the time. Are you kidding me? It's factual. Go research it. It's not my fault.
It's factual, and then you give me your source, and then I debunk it, and then you're like, well, it's a fact.
Like you have to debunk it.
Hold on.
What information, everything.
Victor, what are you saying?
Somebody's right.
I want to know.
Not everybody's wrong all the time. They happen to get that right.
Right.
Mike, shush. We're going on to what Victor is saying.
Oh no, I just want to ask, like, since we're citing sources and you're not happy with what Mike's advancing as a source, what do you consider to be a viable source of a reliable source of information? Where are you getting your facts from?
An institute.
Examples? Like, okay. Well, the thing about markets being forced on third world countries, that I got from Noam Chomsky. And I'm sure you have gripes with him, and you can bring those up. I'm definitely open to that. But that's a specific source for that fact. But that's what we were just arguing about.
And Noam Chomsky actually makes a particularly good source for this argument, since he's neither an ANCOM nor an ANCAP.
No, he's an ANCOM. He's definitely an ANCOM.
He's a syndicalist, which is.
Well, no. Like, those are synthesizable though. So like, he's both kind of.
Yeah, but that can be synthesized with capitalism as well. So he's kind of in between us.
No, he's not. He's he's really left wing. But anyway,
Yeah.
Let's not infight. Like, so that's what my source for that information was.
Okay. My communism is better than your communism.
All right, can we? Do you have questions for the STV team?
Let me think. Nah. Let's bank our minutes. What do you think, Jake?
Well, these minutes are not bankable.
I think I'm finished.
Yeah, me too. Let's go.
I will hand over my state powers to the voluntary market network.
Well, the minutes will actually default to me and to the questions from the people who are watching. So
we're distributing them based on needs.
Okay. All right. At this time, we're going to start 25 minutes of interrogation from the ANCAP side, and from the subjective theory of value side. And they'll go ahead and...
Let's just call it ANCAP and ANCOM. Just for the... I mean, because that's really what this is.
Yeah, theoretically. All right, so you guys go ahead and start your interrogation.
You want to go first, Mike, or what? I don't care. It doesn't matter to me.
I've definitely got a couple different things to say. I want to know, do you guys acknowledge the fact that the labor theory of value doesn't explain prices, which is what economic value theories are supposed to do, but it only pushes it back a step. So here, let me give you the example once again. We have the oil change thing, and it's $30 for an oil change, $20 for the oil and filter, and $10 for the labor. But really, the oil filter, they say, well, the cost for the oil filter goes into that too, right? It's the total cost for that labor and the raw materials. But then they say, well, that's $20 for the oil and the filter, but how was that made? So you have to push it back again. Well, that's because of, it was $5 to make the oil, to get it out of the ground, and, the commodity was traded for $15, and that's why it was $20, right? But then you just push it back. Why was the commodity $15, right? So it only kind of continues to push it back through the chain of production. It doesn't really answer where prices come from, right? I mean,
may I explain?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so in getting the raw materials that the oil filter is made out of, there's miners and there's manufacturers who have to labor to create that. Now, as you go up the line, there's more and more value because more and more labor went into the parts. And now when that oil filter reaches that mechanic shop, they're combining the labor of the miner, the manufacturer, the mechanic,
I understand all that, but I want you to quantify it. How do you quantify it? All you're doing is passing the buck back. You just keep passing the buck back.
Well, what buck is being passed back? I don't.
Wait. I know what he's getting at. It's respective to how much labor, is put into other things as well. Like, how much labor does it take to earn a certain amount of currency, or, grow wheat, or pick an apple off of a tree? That determines the value of it. Now, the harder the labor, the more valuable the commodity. That's what I was that's what I was getting at when I said that diamonds cost a lot because they take a lot to find. They're rare, and they take a lot of labor to excavate and mine and refine. And it's not the subjective value, because if there was a lot of fucking diamonds that were easy to get, then they wouldn't be so valuable. That's why we say something is dirt cheap, because you go outside of your house and it's literally all over the fucking place.
So what if you live in Hawaii? Do you realize how much dirt costs in Hawaii? The same dirt?
Educate me.
About 4 or 5 times as much, the amount of property values out there because it's so
there's
beautiful.
less land in Hawaii, and
Scarcity, and less dirt. There's less dirt, so it's more scarce, so it increases the value.
so it would take more labor to go to the mainland and go get dirt from there if
Right.
you run out of dirt in Hawaii.
Right.
So, I mean, that labor is going into the value of that dirt there.
But
And
you can't
especially if it's a special kind of deluxe dirt that
There's
comes
no objective
only from Colorado.
That's constant. There's no constant objective quantity. You see what I'm saying? There's no value that's constant.
Okay, well, can you answer me a question? Like, what do you mean by passing? Like, what buck is being? I don't really follow that. Like,
All
I
right.
don't understand.
Well, once again, the point of economic value theory is to say, what is the price? What does price come from? Once again, subjective theory of value says it's whatever the person is willing to trade it for at the time. That's all we know. It's all state of mind.
It's
The
basically
labor theory value says, no, we can actually quantify that. We can actually give it a real quantity that's equitable across the board. That's what labor theory value is doing. And so when I ask, you have a $20 oil and filter.
No, I don't believe so.
Write down your little stuff. Take notes on this. So it's a $20 oil and filter, but how did you get $20 for the oil and filter? We get the $30 oil change was from $10 labor and $20 oil and filter, right? Combined for $30 oil change. But now
You expended the labor at your own job.
No, let him explain.
Okay.
So
Wait.
I
didn't quantify the steps.
No. I was asking Michael to explain. I was telling James to let him explain.
Wait, you're a Hawaiian dirt farmer, you see, okay, and you need to expend your.
I want you to stick with the oil change. So we have this is already perfect for us. We have the oil and filter. The oil change was $30, 10 of it labor, 20 of it oil and filter. But the oil and filter, how did that get to be $20? Oh, that was because.
I know what you mean. I know what you're getting at.
How did you get that from you see what I'm saying? It keeps going back farther and farther. It doesn't give us,
I understand what you're getting at.
So is this hinged upon like the idea that the labor theory of value says that all prices must be equivalent? Like I still don't understand.
The point of having a valuation theory is to say, where does the price come from? The labor theory rests at its very base on the subjective theory of value. So the subjective theory of value doesn't need the labor theory of value. The labor theory of value already has the subjective theory of value built in.
Okay, I understand what you're
getting at. You don't mind going through that again?
No, wait, I know what he means. I know what he means, and I can explain it. What he's getting at is...
Answer the question then.
He wants to know what the value of the labor is, like how it can be quantified and what that quantity is worth, and that's what we have to answer.
Okay, so you're asking about the value of labor?
Yeah, that's what he's asking. He wants to know what.
Let's not look at labor in this case. Let's just look at just the oil and the filter. And so it was $20 for both of them. Well, how did we get those prices? Well, it was because the oil filter cost $10 for the raw material, supposedly, and $3 for the labor, and the oil was $6 for the labor and $1 for the actual raw materials. Well, then where'd you get the oil? Well, we had to get gas, and that was $4 for the labor and $2 for the gas. Where'd you get the gas from? Oh, we had to go drill into a mine somewhere. Oh, that took $1.50 for the labor. It just keeps going back and forth. It doesn't tell you where the actual price comes from. The subjective theory of value says we don't know. It's just whatever anybody else will trade it for. It's more open and honest. The labor theory of value tries to give it a quantifiable constant number. It says.
No, it doesn't.
You still get that now? It can only push.
No, I understand. I completely understand what you're saying now. Thank you. But the thing is, the fallacy that I feel like that's hinged on is that the labor theory of value it's aimed at explaining what price is quantifiable in and where price comes from. It's not necessarily hinged. Like let me explain. So it's not necessarily hinged on the how much prices will be. It's what prices are quantified in and where those prices come from. In my specific version of value theory, that when it comes to price, I tend to take Marx's view, which was that prices are directly relatable to each other. So prices come from the relations that other commodities have to each other and the exchangeability they have in the market, which is something that I don't even think the Austrian economists would dispute me on. So
okay, regarding
really when you're trying to say how much is this oil filter worth? What the Marxists is going to be asking themselves is how much is this worth in terms of labor that would go into harvesting wheat or something like that? Like, is this how much labor in farming is this worth, or how much labor in mining is this worth in respect to other things? Like, if I'm mining a diamond, how much labor, or what is the value of that in respect to how much labor would go into farming, like harvesting plants or planting crops or something like that, or refining tobacco or something?
Can I
It's
take
really
a bite?
based. Yeah, it's your interrogation. Go ahead.
Well, I'm
Yeah,
saying
sure.
you're saying it's resting on the subjective theory of value. There is no constant. The labor theory of value tries to assign it a constant, whereas the subjective theory of value does not try to assign it a constant.
It doesn't. That's the flaw here.
You're admitting that the LSTV rests on STV.
No, the labor theory of value doesn't assign a constant. In fact, my own version of the labor theory of value would say the very opposite. So,
And
Well,
really,
remember when we defined terms earlier, though? When we defined terms earlier, it was the cost theory of value states that the value of goods and services are determined by the amount of labor required to produce said goods and services.
that doesn't mean that there's a unit. That doesn't mean that there's a set like objective price for things. That doesn't it doesn't follow at all.
Well, you can say that you can technically say that 4 hours is the labor theory of value. Yeah, if it took you 4 hours to rape somebody and 4 hours to build a car, technically that is
That doesn't.
4 hours. But you can't
Okay, well,
that
that's
rape
again.
doesn't generate revenue. That
put that
doesn't.
over into any other thing. Well, it's just not going to work out. It's all subjective at that point.
Well, no. That's number one, ignoring like the specific concepts of value that different labor theories of, like, for instance, I don't conceptualize value the way you're conceptualizing it. That's ignoring that, number one. It's also ignoring the fact that just because maybe two values are equivalent to each other, maybe like two things had the same amount of labor put into them, that doesn't mean that two other things are going to have the same exact amount of labor put into them as well. So even operating under your kind of weird definition of what value is, it's like that doesn't follow at all. Like it just doesn't like match up at all.
A more general statement, if I can jump in.
Yeah.
Okay. Look at. I've been listening back and forth on that. I just something just very, very basic pertaining to what's being discussed right now in terms to markets and prices and whatnot. Now, in a free economy, the type that Mike and I would advocate, where no person or group of people can use physical coercion against anyone. Economic power can be achieved only by voluntary means, by the voluntary choice and agreement of all those who participate in the process of production and trade. So in a free market, all prices and wages and profits are determined not by arbitrary whim of the rich or of the poor, not by anyone's greed or by anyone's need, but by the law of supply and demand. That's the mechanism of a free market. It reflects and sums up all the economic choices and decisions made by all participants, people who trade their goods and services by mutual consent to mutual advantage, according to their own independent, uncoerced judgment. A person can only grow rich if he's able to offer better values, as judged by the people who are interacting with those who bring their values to the market, and by those who decide to purchase those values, whatever those values happen to be. Subjective, I like ice cream, not apricots. Subjective or objective values. I need nutrition to survive versus eating this rat poison.
That's not nutrition.
I know. That's why I'm bringing an objective element to it.
I think I know what you're getting at, but wouldn't...
I'm just saying that. Well,
Can I say something really quick?
I see what you're saying, but let me jump in here real quick.
Okay.
I believe the capitalists are the ones that say, to be successful, you have to put in a lot of hard work. So you could say that, from my point of view, to become economically successful, it has to be through labor. But I'd imagine the subjective theory of labor, those who subscribe to that, would say that
it's not the labor you put into your job, it's the value of your job that other people see. Now, through that, wouldn't you inherently be giving other people the power to choose things for you through that? Because they're ultimately deciding how valuable you are as a person or as a laborer. Like, let's say a CEO, let's say some dude's a CEO of a company, and he has very few responsibilities, whereas maybe the manager of a restaurant has very many responsibilities. Like, they're responsible for making sure that all the equipment is running and all of the workers show up on time, and if they do not, they have to take their place, whereas the CEO just has to, like, it goes up a pyramid, and whereas the manager would have several people to watch because they're individual laborers, the CEO has to watch over maybe two CFOs. And at that point, what is really the value of the CEO's job? What would you subjectively say that he has a very valuable job and therefore deserves more money for doing that? And I don't really see him as generating revenue for the company. It's
Right,
really the
well,
laborers that generate the revenue for the
You can feel
company.
that way all you want, but it's not up to you, okay? It's not up to me. It's not up to any of us, really. It's up to the world and in spontaneous order. And if this guy does a good job, then maybe, and he, a guy coming in at the top of a company can have a huge impact on what happens with that company. I mean, we're talking everything really rests on upper management. People think it's like the decisions. If a company fails, it's not the workers' fault whatsoever. It is definitely upper management's fault for not about 99% of the time. I know because I've been through some business classes when I was in college. I've seen a lot of different opinions.
Well, then why don't those people...
I'll tell you right now, it's subjective. There's no way to value it. What we're trying to say is you're ridiculous for thinking you can value it and say, not only that, need some upheaval behind it, trying to topple some people. You sound really young and ridiculous to us. I mean, that's just what it sounds like. I kind of felt the way you did when I was younger too, until I really started to understand economic theory and difference curves and their nonsense, etc.
Okay.
I'm not trying to put an age thing. I'm just trying to say I kind of used to be a leftist Democrat when I was younger, and I'm quite a smart guy. I got scholarships and all that kind of stuff. Dean's List, 3 degrees. I'm not trying to hold it over anybody. I'm just trying to say I was a very intellectual, philosophical type person when I was younger, and I have felt a lot of the same way you do. But as you get older, you realize things aren't the way that you really view them at when you're that young. Sadly, right? Like somebody earlier said, anarchy people you don't need leaders. You don't have to have. There's nobody that has leaders. I don't have the exact quote for you, but I wrote that down. I was like, people can have whatever leaders they want. Who are you to stop them from having leaders? Nobody's allowed to be a ruler over anybody else, but if I want to go follow somebody else, I can follow somebody else all I want. And if different people have different ideas, we're individuals. Some people are going to go into a company at top management, and they're going to make a huge change in difference. One guy is worth, if he makes $100 million for the company, he's really worth $90 million, and he'll still make them 10. You see what I'm saying? It's a huge turnaround. The amount of and then what happens is that's only going to encourage people to want to hire him more, and he'll go to the place that's most needed. Whether it's a high productive job, he's not going to be managing a Burger King, right? This is how the market works, flawlessly, beautifully, voluntarily, without the coercion of the state.
Okay.
Yeah, and just Jake, just as I said before, to reiterate, because I don't know if it's my question really penetrated, but I'll just be more specific. I said in a free market, all prices and wages and profits are determined not by the arbitrary whim of the rich or the poor,
Voluntary choices
not
of
by
people.
anybody's greed or by anyone's need, but by the law of supply and demand. This is not an individual fiat deciding that I think I'll charge $500 for this liter of milk because I'm a greedy capitalist.
It doesn't take $500
right?
worth of labor to create.
Let me get on something.
Go ahead.
Okay, so you're talking about you're basically just saying, okay, so in this free market that you're talking about, everything is done through the voluntary in human society. everything is done through the completely uncoerced choices of people within this market economy, and so no one can just be like, well, I'm going to charge 50.
Right. So choices might be limited, but coercion was not involved.
Yeah, okay, I get what you're saying. The problem is it sounds like it doesn't sound realistic to me. And I'm not coming from this perspective that, like, oh, you need a state to regulate society or whatever. I'm coming from the perspective that this idea of a completely uncoerced plane of existence is ridiculous to me. Like, there are always outside factors influencing our choices, and thus no, especially even a form of social organization, let alone, just existence in general. Everything is like there are always outside factors that are influencing our choices, that are coercing us. I am coerced by the fact that I cannot float above my house and meditate or some shit like that. There is always that factor. So this idea of a completely uncoerced society, like, it makes no sense to me. You can have a society where we have the maximum amount of autonomy in human social organizations possible. That is totally fine with me. That is what I advocate. But I cannot get behind this myth that there is some kind of uncoerced plane of existence, especially in the market, where property regimes from the top down are enforced and on people, and that control over property allows other people to leverage power over others, and in turn coerce them. I am definitely coerced that I have no control over the industries that I get the products I need to sustain myself with. I am definitely coerced.
What happens? Hold on, this is our time. So what happens is with capitalism, it's the decentralization of power to the individuals from the collective. There's a collective. You see the proletariat and burgess. I see individualism, and I see a collective, right? And what happens is the collective is always beating down on the individual. War on drugs, taxes, name anything. I mean, just name some kind of all the victimless crimes I could go into.
That's not a collective deal.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely the collective deal. It's a statist deal. It is. It would not survive without the collectivist mentality. Okay, and so
it's the few over the many.
Here's the thing. What we're saying is, here's your spectrum. You either have an individualist society where people are allowed to have their own property and free will and choices, or you don't have individual choice and free will and property. That's the options, right? You either have one or the other. You're either trying to control your own life or you're trying to control everybody else. That's it. We want everybody to control their own lives. I'm sorry if some people might end up homeless. Hopefully we can build a prosperous enough society to where I can give them some shelter. And
but here's the thing.
50% of my money is drained by the collective right now into the statist system. So, here, let's go into this. I have a question for you guys. What if we're looking at it from STV, I would almost call it the objective theory of value instead of the labor theory of value at this point, because that's what I'm trying to show here. Well, why is it in contrast to trying to prove an objective constant? What is a home business under the labor theory of value? How do you value a home business? Is it a home or is it a business? Is it something that we can take over and seize the means of production, or is it a home which it's in its personal property, which nobody is allowed in the collective to go and steal that from them? It's a home business. Go ahead. How do you value that?
Under the labor theory, like, are you talking about how the labor theory of value would conceptualize that, or are you talking about, like, the labor theory of value is some kind of system that we're trying to organize society into? Like, I don't even know what this is. Like, the question is so ambiguous. It doesn't make sense to me.
Okay, so we're building a house that's going to be a home business. How would you value that house?
Do people live there?
Are you talking about, like, what is the conception?
So people live there and are employed there. How much is that place worth?
So in the labor theory of value conception of economic value, how much value is that given? Is that your question?
Right.
Well, okay. It itself may not even have value. It has to for something to have value, it needs to be a commodity. That is, it needs to be exchangeable on the market. It needs to be a value. It cannot just have value inherently. It has to take the form of it has to be involved in
you missed a step. My whole point was to show you that you missed a step. The reason I asked you that question was to throw you off on that tangent. What I really am trying to show you is that there's a difference in production method, okay? So you can't just answer that question because it might have been produced in two different ways, right? You had to flown in the materials from some other place, but they would have been basically equitable material. My point is there's differences in production methods as well. how can you value the labor theory of value? Once again, we're trying to come to prices here within the market system and the items around us, the resources around us. The whole point of tonight is to come into a way to find out the prices, the objective prices for these items. That's what economic value theories is about. How can you quantify any of this stuff? It doesn't make sense to me whatsoever when you know that everything out there is even our preferences, the way we feel about how other people say things. Even the information I gave out at the beginning, once again with my introduction tonight, you might have laughed it off, and other people might have been like, wow, that's really impressive, right? Two different complete mindsets here. So can you not see how the subjective theory of value and the labor theory of value, put in contrast and as a dichotomy, automatically associate you with the objective theory of value? You see what I'm getting at here?
I have, like, that made literally no sense to me at all.
All right.
I think I know what you mean.
You're trying to objectify things, but you're not objectifying them. It's kind of like there's cognitive dissonance right there, to where you're saying the labor theory of value says we can quantify things, but you're not quantifying anything or telling me how the quantification happened.
Let me take a stab at that.
I did. I was talking about, like I went on a whole spiel about commodities and value relations before when I was talking about it.
Let me take a stab at that.
Okay.
Victor, it's your time. Go ahead.
Okay,
You got
look
50 seconds. Go ahead, hurry.
Okay, look at guys. Wealth in a free market is achieved by a free, general, quote-unquote, democratic vote, by the sales and by the purchases of every individual who takes part in the economic life of a community. Whenever you buy one product rather than another, you are voting for the success of some manufacturer of that business. And it's this type of voting. Every person votes not only on those matters which he's qualified to judge by his own preferences, his own interests and needs. No one has the power to decide for another or to substitute his judgment for theirs. No one has the power to appoint himself to the voice of the public and leave the public voiceless and disenfranchised.
Okay, well, that's going to be time for the interrogation sections there. Little not exactly what I was looking for. I was hoping for a, right, do you believe this? Do you believe this? Do you believe this? Do you believe this? And go down, drill down into it. So, unfortunately,
I saw the whole
more of a
no
discussion
question.
type of thing, but that's okay. We learn and we grow, so we're going to move forward with the next section now. You each have 5 minutes to go ahead and explain anything that you feel that you wanted to find, your final conclusions, your final statement about your position, about what was said, and bring that forward. And then we're going to have questions from the people who are watching on the YouTube channel. So if you are watching on YouTube, please go ahead and save your questions and write them down so that way when we go to the questioning, you can go ahead and let me know what the questions are that you would like to ask.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we're going to start with the final statement. We're going to start with Michael, and then we're going to go to the Pizza Cat, and then we're going to go to Victor, and then we're going to have Jake wrap it up.
Okay, so do
Michael?
we each get 5 minutes?
5 minutes each. And you
Fine,
still have the 12 minutes and 10 seconds that you can use towards that if you wanted to extend it, so just let me know you want more time.
All right, guys. So I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight and listening to this. Or maybe not tonight, down the road. I guess it's going to be documented forever. But one of the things I want to point out here is that the LTV tries to create upheaval and revolution, which part of me favors in the idea of mental revolution. I want people to be thinking, right? I don't necessarily want to go out and seize means of production, and sometimes people from that camp can sometimes really come off strong in that aspect. And I'm not saying that these guys are that way. But what I do want to point out is that the labor theory of value was created by a bunch of and thought of by a bunch of economists who had a lot of political connections, right? A lot of corrupt busybodies in the state. And they got power in the first place. So they had to convince someone that their thoughts didn't matter. That's what LTV is really trying to do. To me, it's a restriction of free thought, right? Whereas the subjective theory of value says you're free to think about things how you want to. Obviously, there's some objectivity in the world, and I'm not going to deny that, right? Obviously, if you shoot somebody in the face, you're a murderer. But a lot of other valuations are hard to measure or impossible to measure or quantify. And in those cases, the subjective theory of value does ring true. And that is, once again, that value is a state of mind, and that the value produced of something, or the price of something, is relative to what you can trade for it at that point in time. Now, the pricing system enables us to have a much more stable version of trade, because it says, well, we do have this benchmark that's always there. I'm not saying the U.S. fiat dollar is a good part of that. Obviously, gold and silver used to be the real money back in the day. But the subjective theory of value doesn't try to control the minds of the people, whereas the labor theory of value tries to come out and set a quantifiable, constant statistic. And it was, in my opinion, an attempt for revolution and political upheaval. But the thing is, even though Marx, it comes across as though he wanted revolution, the labor theory of value was favored by a lot of people who favored revolution, I think that it was more attempt for some of these people to try to gain control over the system for themselves and use this upheaval as a vehicle towards more power control for themselves. So in my opinion, this is why I view the labor theory of value as a tool of tyranny. And I think it doesn't prove where prices come from today. It can only, once again, push that buck back to the subjective theory of value. So the subjective theory of value is really the bottom, the rock bottom base for all of these so-called quantifiable numbers from the labor theory of value perspective. I think it's also important to realize that the subjective theory of value does welcome a tolerance and individuality, whereas the labor theory of value really tries to control the means of production, and in that case also mindsets. So the establishment of the state is what I'm mostly concerned about, and to me that is very objective. Right? We are individuals, and anybody that tries to control somebody else, to me, has negative equity, negative value. Now, that being said, we don't always know the exact value, so I can't always quantify it. The subjective theory of value does allow us to have this verifiable numbers. Property relations stem from the subjective theory of value. Since we're individuals, we're going to have our own wants, needs, concerns, and preferences. And the little walls and borders put up around us are a way that we respect one another in our day-to-day lives. The subjective theory of value, once again, is just a state of mind, and value itself is just a state of mind, and you can never overcome that fact. You can never try to quantify every single thing down into the labor theory of value. Obviously, the amount of hours used can be the same, but the amount of production, the methods of production can differ greatly and vastly, and they often do. That's all I have for tonight, guys. I look forward to the questions.
Right, Douglas, your turn.
Okay, yeah, my connection's fine now, somewhat. Now, the reason that I subscribe to the labor theory of value, it's just the way I conceptualize things. I see a lot of things as thermodynamics, and like, if this much energy is expended, that's how much it's worth. And really, if you get down to the science of it, I think that one day we will be able to quantify. And I think today that if we asked somebody with the right qualifications, they could quantify how much labor is worth. I think that's really more of a physics question than an economics question. And something I'd like to point out is that with the Industrial Revolution, the markets changed significantly. We all know this. The way guns are manufactured. To get a musket or a wheel gun or something like that, you used to have to go to a clockmaker, and he would use his skilled labor to make you a gun. And that gun took a lot of time and a lot of effort to create. Now, with the advent of the factory, the assembly line, and modern machines, it takes less labor from an individual person, or less labor in general, to create the same thing at the same value. Like, you can have two exactly the same Colt M1911s if you so desire, because they were both made in the same factory and they were made from the same types of components. They're not specifically handcrafted. That's what makes them less valuable than the musket, is because the musket is one of a kind. not that the musket is one of a kind, that a lot of labor went into the musket. Less labor than went into a modern gun, because it's made with ease. It's made with ease, and it's not something that takes a lot of labor to create. For that reason, I think that's why I subscribe to the labor theory of value. Is that some things take more labor than others to create or manufacture or harvest or grow or mine or any other verb you can think of. They all take a lot of labor, and if you make them take less labor to create, then you can create more of them, and you're devaluing them. That's why Meisterklasse Mauser rifle, which is made by hand by master sculptors or engravers or what have you, they're made special with a lot of labor, and they're not the same as others. And that's about all I have to say.
Okay, Victor?
Right, okay, yeah. The labor theory of value. So I guess a guy who's digging a ditch and fills in the hole again, digs the ditch again, and then fills in the hole and puts a lot of physical labor into it, is creating value, I guess, over the engineer who's just doing a lot of intellectual work. But just to step back and take a look at the wider picture, as I think Jake said, that this is really a face-off between anarcho-capitalists and anarcho-communists, and dropping the LTV abbreviation for right now, I just want to say it really does come down to a clash between individualism and collectivism. And as far as the individual is concerned, it's a matter of standing up for individual rights. That is the gateway to a free society. And in this sense, I'm talking about a right as a moral principle defending and sanctioning a person's freedom of action in a social context. Freedom of action in a social context. That's fundamental rights. This is the only fundamental rights. All the other rights are consequences and corollaries. A man's right to his own life. Life is a process of self-sustaining and self-generated action. The right to life means the right to engage in self-sustaining and self-generated action. That's all it means. It means the freedom to take all the actions required by the nature of a human being for the support, the furtherance, and the fulfillment and enjoyment of his life. His life. We're talking about self-ownership here. So now collectivism, by contrast, is the subjugation of the individual to a group. Now remember, it was said tonight, the collective, in so many words, is primary over the life of the individual, whether that in the collective being the race or the proletariat or the state or the planet or whatever, it doesn't matter. Collectivism holds that a person must be chained to collective action and collective thought for the sake of what's called the common good. That's exactly the premises that we're hearing today. That's exactly the premises inherent in communism. Collectivism holds, or communism for that matter, that can throw in the zeitgeisters as well, might as well. But collectivism holds that in human affairs, the collective, society, the community, the nation, the proletariat, the race, whatever, that's the standard of value. The general good over the individual good. That's what's being purported here. Now, on this view, the individual has reality only as a part of the group and value only insofar as he serves the group. And the only way to implement a doctrine of that kind is by means of brute force. And statism has always been the political corollary of collectivism. You cannot have that standard of value without enforcing it by physical force. Modern collectivists conceive of the concept of society as a superorganism, as some supernatural entity apart from and superior to the sum of its individual members. So what I'm standing for is freedom of the fundamental freedom is the fundamental requirement of a human being's rational life. It's the individual that is the thing that's only real. Society does not exist other than the individuals who compose it. So it is individualism that I'm speaking of, in contrast to collectivism. Now, anarcho-capitalists acknowledge that people are individuals, and they do not fit easily into categories like bourgeois and proletariat, as if it was some kind of frozen social status. They can even move from one category to another, at least in a free society, rags to riches, whatever the story might be. And it was only under a free market, to whatever degree that has been adopted, that an individual is freed from the power of the rapacious whims of bureaucrats, or from the random chance of his family name to determine how much he can achieve. So once again, I put it to you that there is no such thing as a proletariat versus the working class. It's not a frozen status, woven in nature.
Okay, now we have Jake for your 5 minute. Remember, you do have 12 minutes and 10 seconds banked.
Yeah, I might go over, so if it goes over, I'll use those minutes.
Can I chime in a bit when we get to the banked minutes?
Yeah,
Opportunity.
if you want, yeah. But anyway, what, I guess I want to extend kind of do the formalities. Thank you for all of the guests for coming on and having this discussion. Thank you, Robert, for hosting and all that. And thanks for anyone who finds this interesting enough to watch. I guess my closing statement would be that I feel I have a similar attitude that they have to the labor theory of value. That's my attitude to the subjective theory of value. I don't see it as an accurate. I see it as a part of the broader bourgeois ideology that's meant to justify bourgeois society. It's not meant to be scientific. It's not meant to explain any of, actually explain these phenomena. People that adopt it think they do. These economists that, adopt these ideas think they do. These people on, I'm debating with right now think they do, but they don't. It's one of those great deceptions that our society is filled with. It's meant to justify the existing social order, which is capitalism. It is the order of capital. It is the law of value. It is, the capitalist epoch, whatever you want to call it. It is capitalism. And specifically what the subjective theory of value does is all bourgeois theory. It doesn't take into account the actual environment. It's based on a truncated idea of capitalism. It's based on a truncated idea of the world. By extension, and also just on its own at times. And specifically when it comes down to the subjective theory of value, it's about abstracting from the actual structure of economic value, that is the commodity, and putting it into personal preferences that can allow us to make broad statements about how capitalism is a structure of individual whim, how value is not this coercive structure of capitalism that imposes its will on us and allows other people to impose their will on us, but rather is just the subjective preferences of individuals. And so this is the kind of language, and this is the kind of language that I feel my opponents are getting caught up in. Because even when I go into the commodities and stuff, they tend what I've seen is they've kind of pushed that to the side and then gone on with this notion of personal preference as what I'm talking about. And I mean, I pointed out many times that I wasn't talking about that. That may be what you're talking about. We can have that argument, but that's not what the labor theory of value is necessarily aiming to describe. And so, there's this kind of newspeak that gets, it's not their fault or whatever. I just feel that they've been, as they probably, think of me, they probably think I've been deceived by the collectivist system, and I think they've been deceived by the bourgeois society. I think that they're kind of stuck in this world of newspeak that doesn't allow them to actually properly engage with these ideas and get a correct view of the world around them. And that's true of everybody, but specifically, I think that would apply to them in this case. So that's all I gotta say, mostly. Yeah.
All right. Can I take over now?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
All right. Now I think the main difference between a capitalist and a socialist is a socialist. We believe we're born into a caste system, much like in classical India, where if you're not born into the right, if you're not born into money, then there's certain freedoms you'll just never have. Like, there are people who can just get away with anything, and they can do whatever they want, and they can exploit people, and they can do whatever because they have money. And if those, like, we just don't have the freedom to do that if we're born into a lower caste. Now, this is also reflected in a lot of schools as well. Like, you have preppy kids and stuff whose parents have money and they live on a better side of town than you do, and they look down on you for that, maybe. Or maybe you're just not a part of their social group and they place themselves more valuable than they do to you, so what do? You collectivize with other people who are like you. And like, you do things like that. And if you're not born into the right, place, then there's just a lot of disadvantages you run into. Like, maybe in a lot of places in the South, black people just aren't, they're born into bad conditions, and it's really hard for them to get out of that, just because that's where they were born. And maybe white people are born more advantaged in some places. Up in the North, I know it's more equal there. But in the South, there's just a lot of poverty, especially with black people. Like, in trailer parks, you'll find white people. In poor neighborhoods, you can find black people. And people are just born into these castes, and they're disadvantaged because they don't have money and they don't have influence. Now, the socialist wants everybody to just collectivize voluntarily. If you're an anarchist like me or Jake, we want to collectivize with people of all groups, and you can go live on your good side of the town, and I'll live on my side, which I'm probably more comfortable in anyways, and we can just coexist and just not bother each other the way that it would happen if they were using their influence or their money or something like that to influence other people. Because if you see yourself in the same group as them and they see themselves in the same group as you, then they're not going to they're not going to mistreat you quite the way they would like a foreigner or something. And I believe the capitalist, rather than collectivizing and being in a group with other people, they would rather attain themselves as an individual and seek freedom and equality through everybody being an individual. But I just don't see how that could work, because an individual in capitalism can gain capital, more capital than other people, maybe, and use that to influence other people. And that just perpetuates this caste system that we socialists see. And it disadvantages people who already were born into unfortunate circumstances. Like the working class. They don't have the power to choose, but there's a large working class, and so the president of a company has the power to choose who they want to hire. And since there's more workers than there are companies, there's, the company itself has more choices than the workers do, and the workers can be disadvantaged this way.
Okay. So at this time, then, what I'd like to do is go ahead and open it up to the questions that we have from the audience, and we're going to go ahead and start with, let's see here. Is anyone familiar with Baumbark's arguments?
Who?
Baumbark's. Bohmbawerks.
Kinji, did you change your name?
No. All right. Nobody's familiar with that. Sorry. All right. So could somebody go into the into an explanation as to what the diamond water paradox is.
Is that in response to what Michael and I were discussing earlier, whereas
Well,
I was saying that a diamond is worth a certain amount, but he said that water, because it falls from the sky and you don't expend labor for that, isn't as valuable?
The diamond water paradox is basically this: that if you are in a situation where you have water where it's plentiful, and you have diamonds which are rare, diamonds will have more value. And if you have a situation where you're in like the desert, regardless of outside of that desert, even if you have the chance to potentially get out of the desert, if you are going to be dying of thirst, water is significantly more valuable, and you would trade as many diamonds as it took to get the water necessary to survive. So how is it that water is more valuable in some circumstances but less valuable in other circumstances?
Because you have to expend more labor to get water in certain circumstances than you would in others. In that desert, you have to find a fucking cactus, and you have to put your hands on that fucking spiny cactus to open it up and get the water inside. But in some other place where there's more water, you have to open up the spiny fucking ground to get the diamonds.
Michael?
All right. Well, I mean, I see where he's coming from on that. I didn't know I was going to have to answer this. So yeah, so we have the diamond water paradox. My answer to that would be, just because the labor on it happened, I think that you're taking this correlation and trying to make it a causation issue. One doesn't always relate to the other. So just because in this instance you had more labor that went into it for this one time, you could have other scenarios. Like let's say you're trading something right now, and you have a book and you have a computer. You have the ability to get both of those right then at that time, right? So the question really is at that point, what do you need? It's not hard to go out. You don't have to really exert much labor to get either of those. It's probably labor neutral. So that, I think that example really negates what you're trying to get at.
Okay, so then I guess we're going to go on to the next question here. The question is basically, if you have the marketplace determining the actions of the various different individuals, putting their money towards whatever it is that they are, quote, voting for, doesn't that give more votes to the 1% than it does to the 99%?
I'd assume this is a question to the capitalists.
Yeah.
Okie dokie.
And there is no such thing as a perfect world. You're right. One thing that we do know about, at least in a free society, in a truly free capitalist society where there's no political favors and subsidies and loopholes for their friends, is that it's going to be much more equitable. You're going to have a lot less I don't want to use the word excess rich people, but I think you'll have a lot more regular people who are at the bottom who are going to be richer. You're going to have more jobs. You're going to have much more production that's going to be pumped out in a freer society. So I don't always see it as though that's going to be a big enough problem. It is true, though, every time we go and do something, there's going to be somebody who does have a little bit more money than us, and they can expend a little bit more on that good or service. But that doesn't always necessarily mean it's a bad thing. Sometimes these rich people in a free society will have, the reason they have that money in the first place is because they were responsible with it. And they tried to invest in good things that they thought would pay off in the long run. Now, you could say, well, they're just going to go and invest in an army and come and kill us. That might be true, too. But the point of this is they're not going to be seen as legitimate by the people, right? Whereas the collective, the state can do it writ large, in mass, and it just happens to go as business as normal, and everybody accepts it, and you put on your whatever country flag you have on your shoulder, and you praise it all joyfully, right? So I don't see it in the market as long as it's a voluntary transaction and it creates no other infringement on somebody else. My main concern is not that it's my neighbor. It's not that, I don't want to be one of those jealous guys who's like, man, that guy knows how to make an F-18 just a flying around, not the bomb others, or some cool little go-kart. I'm so jealous. I wish everybody could have that, right? I'm calm enough, respectful enough to realize, hey, I can work with this guy voluntarily, and hopefully together we can build a new one for myself. And if he doesn't want to do business with me, I can go and do something else. And there's tons of other things in the world of freedom that we can have, especially moving forward. So I don't see it, as long as it's voluntary, I don't see it being an issue or an obstacle.
Can I answer that question?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Look, a businessman's success depends on his intelligence, his knowledge, his productive ability, his economic judgment, and on the voluntary agreement of all those he deals with. His customers, his suppliers, his employers, or employees rather, his investors. A bureaucrat's success, however, depends on his political pull. A businessman can't force you to buy his product. If he makes a mistake, he suffers the consequences. If he fails, he takes the loss. A bureaucrat forces you to obey his decisions, whether you agree with him or not. And the more advanced the stage of a country's statism, the wider and more discretionary the powers wielded is by the bureaucrat. So if he makes a mistake, you suffer the consequences. If he fails, he passes the losses on to you in the form of heavier taxes. So what I'm saying is you simply cannot inflate businessmen versus bureaucrats, and this whole discussion of like, oh, the businessman has power because he has money. No, it's you can't interchange. They're not interchangeable phenomena. So this is what I've touched on earlier before. Is that it's not the same thing. The power of the buck is not the same thing as the power of the gun.
All right. This was a clarification question for Douglas. The question is,
shit, yeah.
all right, so when you're in the desert and you're having to get your cactus water, it's a really hard thing to do. It's even harder, though, to get the diamonds still. So why is it that there's still more labor required to get diamonds in that situation, and still water is more valuable?
Well, is water more scarce?
The amount of labor that is in the situation necessary to get diamonds is more than the amount of labor necessary to get water in this particular desert. So the question is, what is that?
Okay, I have the perfect answer for that. Okay, well, the water is going to sustain my life, so I can labor more to get out of the fucking desert, where water is more plentiful, where water is fucking everywhere, where it falls from the sky like some sort of fairy tale.
Let me clarify. He's saying that the water is easier to get. You use less labor to get the water, yet the water holds a higher price or value.
Yeah, well, that water
why would you have something? The labor theory of value would state that the diamond, since it's harder to get to, would be more valuable. Well, why is it that even though the labor would be easier to get the water, the labor theory of value would still have the diamond ranked higher in value?
Let me explain that. Well, if I get the diamond, then I'm still going to be in the desert, and that didn't help me labor at all to get out of it. Now, if I get the water, or if I eat the fucking cactus or something, when I get the water, then that water will enable me to travel further. It can cool me off and make me not die, and therefore allow me to labor more and create more revenue for myself, metaphorically, not through currency, but through, just the value of the things that I'm doing. It'll allow me to get out of the desert to where, I can get more water, and I can go find a diamond there where there's enough water to help me, where there's enough water and food to help me labor enough to get a diamond if I do so please.
Okay. Then I guess this question is for Jake. It would look like, who is the decider of value in a socialist society, if not the state?
Well, are we talking about economic value or just value in general?
take it however you mean it. That's the question that was.
We were talking about economic value. Economic value is something specific to capitalism. As I was talking about before, it's not a trans-historical phenomenon. It's something that exists within certain social relations. It's not, it's a phenomena of capital and thus capitalism. If you're talking about value just in general, people's preferences, I mean, in any system, people's preferences are decided by them. Whether there's a collectivist apparatus destroying individual freedom or not, people are always having their preferences, decided by them and the outside factors that are, influencing those preferences. And that may differ, and the outside factors may differ, but it's, the same general rule.
Yeah, there doesn't necessarily have to be a decider of value.
We don't have, we can't make people preference. We can influence it, but we can't get into people's brains and wire it a certain way. You know what I'm saying? So it would be the same in any other society. It's going to be that the person's mind and the outside factors that influence their their choices and how they evaluate the situation. So that's economic value. It wouldn't exist in a socialist society because a socialist society is not based on the production of commodities. Whereas, just in general value, it would be decided like it usually is, by outside factors and people.
Oh shit! I'll be right back.
Okay, so I have a question for the subjective theory of value in cap position. All right. Obviously, when you are dealing with human beings, they're influenceable. You can influence them through the use of various different marketing techniques. How is it that in an anarcho-capitalist society that value, which would theoretically be subjective in your perspective, would not be dictated through the use of appropriate or powerful marketing techniques to decide what it is that people should value by getting them to value the idea of having cigarettes in order to have female empowerment, or to have them buy into thinning products in order to maintain a slender figure, which we should all aspire towards, or instead be displaying our opulent voluptuousness instead in, let's say, the Victorian period. So, how is it that marketing does not, in essence, cause the capitalists give them the opportunity to dictate to everyone else what is valuable?
I'd like to answer that. And
Go for it.
Mike, want to take a stab at it first? I'm happy to answer it as well.
Go ahead. I'll answer it after you done. I'll fill out whatever I have to cover.
Right. Okay. Yeah. No. Actually, that was something that's a standard challenge that's been shot out to me by the Zeitgeisters. So the whole, swaying of the individual, the pliable will of the individual being bent according to the marketer's nefarious plans to get him to buy the pet rock. But we have to look at it from the wider picture of that. When we look at modernity and all its ugly glory as it is today, we have to understand, of course, that the mass of people out there have been so damaged by the type of child rearing that they've been subjected to, and by the indoctrination camps, where their critical reasoning faculties have been seriously hampered. Now, that's not a result of marketing. That's the result of the most vulnerable, formative years of a human being his childhood, and what he's subjected to by the powers that be, the culture at large, the public schoolings, dysfunctional family homes, which of course Stefan has taken the task to challenge directly, and I'm glad that he is. He's making very valuable contributions that way, in terms of the type of human beings that are being produced. So that can also extend to other realms of the individual's life when it comes to the persuasive powers of the marketer. Where you do have critical thinking people, though, Take for myself, for example, I laugh at a lot of the commercials that I see. I think that it's ridiculous. However, if I see that it's a product that I might very well be interested in, aside from the girl in the bikini smiling and drawing me into it, I just evaluate it objectively. Hey, that sounds like a good product. I want that. I need that. But I'm not being pulled into it by some kind of like emotional manipulation. I'm just making an evaluation of it. So I think that that would apply to an entirely different society where so-called manipulative commercialization, so forth, would be nothing more than information. Hey, I got a product here. Do you want it or not?
Mike?
Yeah, guys. So one of the things that pops in my head is asking the question of the opposite direction. So what about in a socialist society? Are people not going to be able to have freedom of speech, and are they not allowed to trade personal property? Would the collective not vote to market something and brainwash people also? It's very one-sided and biased against a free society, as if only a free society can have bad things happen through en masse, right? And I think another thing to be noted here is it's a side effect of freedom of speech. So people have the right to say what they want, especially if it's factual and they don't fraud somebody else out of their property. I don't see what the big deal is, or how you're going to stop it anyway. What's the alternative to this? Having some, the FCC come around and try to regulate every single word that goes out, it's just ridiculous, right? We already know that it limits freedom of speech, and it just doesn't work anyway. So one of the things that pops into my head is, this could happen back in a social society as well, of having people brainwashing others. I don't believe, really, marketing can definitely affect things, right? So, you put an engineer in front of a marketing formula, and what's going to happen? He's going to be like, well, that doesn't make sense, Why does it matter if it's red or if it's in a blue box, We don't know, but statistically, the blue box sold 20% more, so we can take something away from that at least, right? And then the engineer, too, can come to some consequentialist ideal or value. But you can't stop other people from freedom of speech. And you're going to have some problems in a free society. Once again, does it fraud somebody else, this language? And if you can prove that it frauded somebody else, harmed them and their property and their body, then that's a different story, right? Obviously, you can at least have some retribution or restitution for that. And once again, when you're in a society, a free society where people have multiple arbiters, you're not going to have like a court system and they own all the police like in the state and the collective. Quite the opposite. In a free society, the people who are doing arbitration, they will have their own arbiters inside of them, which do multi-tiered arbitration inside of the arbitration and mediation system. And then it's going to be so job specific, and division of labor is going to be created that it's going to make other people, like the law enforcement branch, different from the company that's actually issuing out the arbitration agreement conclusion or whatever the verdict was. So, trying to chase down people and their freedom of speech, to me, I just think it's kind of ridiculous, and you have much more problems when you monopolize resources versus allowing people to have their own control in their own individuality.
Okay, well, this leads me into a question that I would have for the ANCOM perspective, which is similar. Obviously, when you're dealing with a society that is not reflecting of individuals owning their own particular groups or their own particular properties that they manage, and whether that be their home or whether it be a factory that they labored to create or that they purchased through a trade through somebody else who labored to create it. You're going to have people who are helping to make these decisions about how these resources should be used, and their values will then be, potentially used. How do you prevent the influential, popular, and the charismatic leaders from basically becoming oligarchs? Jake?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, I don't see so. I think this is a problem that any society is going to have. Any society has the option, or any society is going to have leaders, people with different talents that they could use to their advantage, there's always the possibility of what anarchists call the dictatorship of the sociable, where people, people with better social skills dominate people with less social skills.
Yeah.
So,
Also,
I mean, this is.
like the problem with
I answer this one?
Let him finish there. Let Jake finish, please.
Yeah, so there's always that possibility, and that exists with any society, and it's something that any society is going to deal with, whether it's your free market society with freedom everywhere, just fucking spewing out of people's noses or whatever, or it's the evil collectivist homogenous society. But it's something that's going to have to be dealt with by any society. I think that it would be dealt with better in a socialist society, because in a socialist society, the means of production that sustain everybody, and are collectively owned, because and thus people have power is shared. No one has more power than another person, and no one is in an authoritarian position of coercion, of kind of freedom destruction that this kind of private property relation gives us. The class system of capitalism is removed. That definitely does exist, where some people have, again, that kind of, differential control over the production that other people need to survive, right? That other people need to produce for themselves, that other people use to get the products that that produces the things that make life worth living. This is like. So socialism is, in a sense, the antithesis of oppression. The kind of, we all should be on, power should be distributed in our society equally, rather than, certain classes of people being able to use property relations to their advantage over other people and to exploit other people. Socialism, again, it's the antithesis of oppression, and so definitely a society that's based on egalitarian power relations is going to be better adept at dealing with possibilities for things like the dictatorship of the sociable than say a capitalist society, where there are classes that have property titles that they can use to their advantage over other people.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. There was another question that was from a different group, and is for the ANCAPs. Assuming that we take a look at the caloric input that is necessary for labor theory of value, that the amount of calories of energy that are used, or joules of energy that are used in order to produce a good or product, product or good, does that somehow, if it were based upon that, does that somehow not make sense to you? That if it takes a lot more effort, thus the amount of supply would be lower, because there's more effort required in order to produce it. We have a lower supply, thus creating a supply and demand curve. The amount of demand, well, the demand would be based upon the amount of caloric benefits that somebody would get in their own particular realm. That they would have less. Let's say somebody will demand a item that will give them more energy than an item that would give them less energy. Therefore, we can actually do an objective. All right, well, there's the caloric balance that occurs, the amount of energy that was produced, the amount of energy that was consumed in the production of whatever.
All right, and no, because value is not dependent upon energy or labor or any of this. It's dependent upon perception. Value is perception. It goes back to this whole idea of we're going to have an egalitarian society. How in the hell are you objectifying egalitarian? It's impossible. It's really impossible. So no, just right off the bat, my natural reaction to that is it's impossible. Victor, go ahead.
Yeah, I still it really hasn't been answered tonight, but like this whole issue of the value of labor, okay, has been brought right down to physical labor. Otherwise, if they don't extend the efforts of the capitalist class as being laborers in their own way in the division of labor society, not only constitutes the physical, it also constitutes the intellectual. So the only conclusion that I can come to where the bourgeois class is being excluded, where they're just the exploiters and not contributors to the division of labor society, is two reasons. Number one, the Marx was a materialist, so that means that he just reduces everything down to the material universe that excludes not only God, but also takes in its whirlwind free will and mind as well. Now we're talking about the mind that behind production. The problem of survival is primarily intellectual, I would say, by contrast, not just physical.
Okay.
Yeah, number two,
go ahead.
say that. Yeah, no, number two as well. I mean, that's the whole source of where the exploitation comes from. If you put the thesis forward that it's only physical labor that's the creation of an industrial civilization, and the capitalist is just sitting back and watching the profits roll in while he does nothing, that's the source and claim and allegation of exploitation.
All right. Well, looks like we've run out of questions, and I just wanted to thank all of our participants. I think that you guys were great as far as like, bringing yourselves to the table and being willing to discuss the issues. And I'm glad that there was no personal attacks and saying, you're an idiot type of things. Obviously we want to have a intellectual discussion and debate. I think that in the future we're going to have some more controversial debates where people are not necessarily discussing philosophical ideas about economics, but more about whether or not you can actually own something, or what into how that helps people or hurts people, things of that nature. In any case, I do want to thank everybody who has decided to join in watching the show. Thank you for all of your questions, and on our next show, we'll certainly have some more discussions and explore other, various different questions about why it is that we don't need the state, and why it is that we need to have certain preferences or values or understandings. So I do thank everybody for joining, and if you have any recommendations for things that people should see, I'd like to give everybody an opportunity to present something that they would like for everyone who is watching to go ahead and take a look at, that they think that would benefit them in their understanding of these subjects.
I think this is something that Victor will agree with me on. Everybody go on Netflix and watch the Zeitgeist movie.
I've seen it.
He's joking.
Yeah.
I'm not joking. I'm serious. I like that movie.
Well, if you haven't seen it,
surprised.
it's something that you probably should see.
I'm not surprised.
All right, Victor, anything that you would recommend that people should read or see that would help them understand this particular topic better?
His lectures.
Yeah, well, why not? That's a good start. Yeah. Actually, in regards to the whole history of the development of classical liberalism, where it also sides by a lot of opposing views, and that it's not a homogeneous whole that just came together with a lot of soundbite dictates. A book that I would recommend would be George H. Smith's A System of Liberty. It's an absolutely extraordinary book on the development and the history of classical liberalism, and it talks about things like Adam Smith, like in his, who's considered to be, I guess maybe one of the bourgeois apologists for the capitalist class, but from which Marx took his labor theory of values. So it just goes to show that in the history of libertarian thought, or classical liberalism that came later on to libertarianism, is not some kind of like a doctrinaire, homogeneous system. That it's very rigorous, it's very nuanced, and it's not as black and white and stark as might be presented. George H. Smith, A System of Liberty.
All right, Jake, so any particular recommendations from you?
Yeah, I would recommend that everybody watch the videos of Capitalism 101, the Left Libertarian and Libertarian Socialist Rants. Also, you should definitely read Karl Marx's Capital. But it's a really hard book to understand for people who don't get the language, and that's kind of one of its faults, I feel. So, Brendan Cooney's videos, the Capitalism 101 guy, his videos are very good for helping you to understand that. There's also other supplementary texts that you can use, or you can just ask people that have read it. There's like whole internet communities of people, like on Facebook and stuff. So, that's basically all.
All right, and Mike?
All right. Once again, everyone, thank you so much for coming out here tonight. It means a lot to me, and I know it does to everyone else. Usually I have other books and videos and all kinds of things I recommend, articles, etc. Today I actually want, for this topic, I think Dr. Robert Murphy's book, Chaos Theory, is really great. So check him out. The Market for Liberty audiobook. I think it would highlight a little bit of what we talked about tonight. And just typing in subjective theory of value on Mises.org. Not that I'm a Misesian to the extreme. I like the Mises Institute, though, and they've definitely got a lot of ANCAP work that I'm really fond of. And I know that if you type in subjective theory of value there, you get some wonderful articles, some of which I used the resources for the show tonight. So thanks to everyone who has contributed and written and produced these great materials. It's really brought me a long way, and I hope it does others as well.
Okay, so at this point, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the call, wrap up the discussion. If you do find that you would like to have a statist or an anarchist come on my show and have a discussion with me or with any of our guests that we've had here, I'm sure that they might entertain the idea of having the opportunity to come back on and discuss things further. So let me know. My name is Robert Kruger. I'm on Facebook. You can just go ahead and pull me up and send me a message and let me know that you're interested in having a discussion. Again, thank you for watching, and thanks all of you for participating as our guests here. Certainly do appreciate you coming on and having this debate. Take care.